the case for the appeal for the Barbecue King catering. We have on the panel today Councillor Bill Swan, Councillor Sarah Kerr, and Councillor Emma Hobbs. I'll just ask everyone to switch on your camera and your mic when you're asked to speak. Everyone will be speaking through the chair as directed by the chair. So please switch off mobile phones, Alexas, or Google Boxes. And I will start now by asking for nominations for a chairman, please.
I would like to nominate Councillor Bill Soane, please.
And I second that.
Okay, Bill, you have been elected chairman. I will pass it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Just go through a couple of procedure notes. Only members of the licensing committee and those people who have been invited will be allowed to speak at the meeting.
Is now exiting.
If you're not currently speaking or being asked to speak, please mute your microphones. If you do not mute your microphone, it will be muted for you. To assist people viewing the meeting, could everyone except the licensing committee members turn off their cameras and only turn them on when asked to speak? Everyone will have their turn to speak, but only when directed by the chair. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce members of the licensing committee. Well, we've already done that. That's Sarah Kerr, Emma Hobbs, and myself, Bill Soane. But also, I'd like to
is now joining.
Would like to welcome members of the officers supporting the meeting. That's Ben Defoe, our legal advisor, and Lucianne Bowker from Democratic Services. This is to let those listening know who's in attendance. I'd like to also introduce others who are present at the meeting. Karen Colt is a licensing officer. Julia O'Brien, also a licensing officer. Adam Davis, Assistant Director, Children's Social Care. Irene Kearns, Senior States Supervisor. Matt Lewin, Legal Advisor for the Objectors. Emma Reid from Thames Valley Police. Felicity Parker from Thames Valley Police. John Payne, Legal Advisor to the Appellant, that's Barbecue King Legal Advisor. And Ken Mersaluglu, the Appellant, that's Barbecue King. Also, welcome Wokingham Youth and Community Centre Manager, Caroline Heap. I have to advise you that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. The live streaming will be stopped when the meeting goes into part 2 session. Now, during this meeting, should any technical problems arise, the meeting may be adjourned to re-establish connection. In this instant, the clerk will intervene and microphones will be muted. The panel can ask for an adjournment at any time if it decides that it needs to consult with the legal advisor in private. Thank you very much for that. So, first of all, ask if there are any declarations of interest. If there's not, no. Can I go now to Karen Court? You're all quite happy. Go to Karen Court to present the report on the part of the licensing authority. Karen.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good morning.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Court. I'm a licensing officer within the Public Protection Partnership, which is the shared service for environmental health and licensing across Wokingham Borough Council, Bracknell Forest Council and West Berkshire Council. As a licensing authority, we're responsible for a wide range of licensing, which includes street trading. This is licensed by way of adopted legislation, which is the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, Schedule 4 for street trading. This was adopted by Wokingham Borough Council in the year 2000 for street trading consents. Mr. Mersaluglu has traded as Barbecue King under that legislation since the year 2000. Originally, he was at the hard standing behind the bus shelter in Reading Road, then for a short period in the car park of St Paul's Parish Rooms, and since November 2016 from the car park of the Youth and Community Centre in Reading Road. Since 2005, he has also held a premises licence for late night refreshment under the Licensing Act, as he serves hot food after 11 o'clock at night. Obviously, that particular licence is not the subject of today's hearing. Your agenda bundle summarises the current renewal, which has been going on since November. On the agenda pack, we're starting from page 7, which I assume you've all already seen. Just to confirm that the application was made and received on the 14th of November. The consultation period for this ran from the 18th of November through to the 4th of December. And you have the various consultation responses in there. The application was correctly made. It was checked with the applicant applying on behalf of Barbecue King Catering with 3 nominated assistants. The fee was correctly paid. The trading hours applied for were the same as previously, i.e. Monday to Sunday from 5 p.m. until 3:30 hours in the morning, and the activity is given as catering activities. At the bottom of page 8, you have the consultation responses which we received. We had a no objections response from Thames Valley Police on the 21st of November. Environmental Health commented on the 20th of November to say they had no comments to make, and they reconfirmed that on the 2nd of April to confirm that there had just been the 1 complaint since September 17, which is referred to, and that was around litter at the site. That was in September 2017. Adam Davis, Assistant Director for Children's Services, raised his concerns in an email to Craig Hobworth of Estates Unit of Property on the 20th of November, and following that, Irene Kearns of the Estates Unit initially approached licensing. There were various discussions to confirm the renewal situation, and from that then there was responses from the Estates Unit offering initially a 1-month agreement. That was not accepted, so that was withdrawn, and then ultimately licensing on the 14th of January 2020 in response to the Estates Unit's confirmation that landowner permission to trade from that site was withdrawn. That left licensing in the position that without landowner consent, we had to refuse the street trading renewal, which was done on the 14th of January. Mr. Mersaloglu said he wished to appeal that decision, which is why we're holding the hearing today. We agreed that we would facilitate that, and we sought submissions. We asked the Estates Unit and Adam Davis both to detail their concerns, which are then attached for you in the pack. The panel today is therefore invited to consider the submissions, to hear the submissions which are included in appendices 1 to 25, which are all detailed for you, and then in effect to take these into consideration. What I'd also like to draw your attention to is the fact that Mr. Mersaloglu is now trading from a slightly different location. He's no longer trading in the youth centre car park. He is actually trading in the grass verge at the front of the car park. I need to just clarify again for the panel that this is not an authorised trading location. He has not applied to trade from this different location. We look very much at X marks the spot for the location where you're authorised to trade from. And without authorised trading, obviously, following this hearing, that issue will need to be addressed with appropriate action. So that we're very much aware that there is this unauthorised trading in a different location taking place, and that does very much need to be addressed as a separate issue. Following publication of the agenda, Mr. Payne, who is the applicant's legal representative, he has made various additional submissions, which are included in section 4.1, which has already been circulated to you all. And they also submitted a letter in support from a Mr. Donoghue a few days ago, which has also been included. In section 4.2, you have the additional submissions from Irene Kearns of Property and also from Adam Davis, Assistant Director for Children's Services, in support of their objections. And with the chairman's permission, Chairman, I would like to invite that both Irene Kearns of Property and Adam Davis would be invited to present their objections in full to the panel, so that you have full details of what the objections are and the reasons for withdrawing landowner consent. I believe Mr. Davis, Adam Davis, would additionally like to call Thames Valley Police, who are represented today, as we've heard. He would like to call them to also invite them to give additional evidence in support of this. Just a couple of additional points which have come in at the last minute. We had an email on the 5th of June from a local resident. I've heard from her this morning. She's quite clear that she wishes to remain anonymous. She doesn't wish her email to actually be published, but she has asked that if everyone on the panel would like to hear that particular submission, I'm happy to read out the text of the email later on in the hearing if you would like me to do that. And also, importantly, I need to mention that at 5:05 last night, I received an email from Mr. Mersaloglu, which, with your permission, I would like to again read out. Are you happy, Chairman, that I actually go ahead and read out the content of this email now?
Yeah, I'm quite happy.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, this is taking a little bit of time. Okay. So this was received 10th of June, so that was last night, Wednesday the 10th of June, 17:05, and it's directly from Mr. Mersaloglu. It says, "Hi Karen, I have removed Mr. X and his brother Mr. Y from assistant worker from yesterday, immediate effect, and replaced with Mr. Z, Mr. A. I will send you their pictures and other relevant documents later, Kenan Mersaloglu." In response to that, I have sent Mr. Mersaloglu the standard assistant nomination form, which is what we do every time new assistants.
Karen, sorry, you're breaking up. Could you?
Yeah, sorry. Is that any better? Let me turn the camera off for a moment. Is that any clearer?
It is for me.
Is that okay?
It is clear for me.
I have a problem. I wonder if it's Bill's line, because Bill seems to have frozen.
Yes, I was just wondering.
If everybody just holds on a minute, let's see if we can get Bill back then. Bill, can you hear now?
That looks better.
Bill,
I can hear now. It was breaking up completely.
So if you can repeat, Karen.
Yes, sure. Shall I read the text of the email in full again?
Yes, if you could. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. No problem at all. Okay, so the email was sent at 17:05, Wednesday the 10th of June, and it says, "Hi Karen, I have removed Mr. X and his brother Mr. Y from assistant worker as of yesterday, as from yesterday, immediate effect, and replaced with Mr. A and Mr. B. I won't obviously read out the names. I will send you their pictures and other relevant documents later, Kenan Mersaloglu." And in response to that, I have sent the standard assistant nomination form, which is what we require every time there is a change of assistant on a van, for him to complete and return immediately, together with photos so that we have IDs of the people and also their food safety training certificates. So that was sent out last night. As of this morning, I've not received that back, but I'm sure Mr. Mersaloglu will be able to confirm when we will be receiving that information. I think that covers the additional information. Thank you, Chairman. And obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask that the email that you've had from the resident, can we first of all seek the agreement from the appellant that he's happy for this to be read?
Chairman, in the absence of the details about who the appellant is, I can't see that how we can actually agree that.
Sorry, you're not in agreement for that to be read.
I think in the absence of details of who the person is and being able to challenge that information, no, I can't see that we can agree that.
Sorry, can I ask our legal representative, Ben Defoe, if he has a comment on this at all?
You can. Let me just turn my video microphone on a second. There is no rule of procedure. What is important is you do what you think is fair. It may be that the starting point is to let the applicant see the email, see what it says, and then the applicant can make a decision as to whether it is prepared to accept it going in, or whether it would still seek to resist the email going in. You could obviously, the fact that it is anonymous will affect the weight that you can put on the email, and no doubt the applicant would make submissions to that effect. But ultimately, it would be your decision as to whether you want to hear that evidence or not, and to consider what weight to put on it, having heard what the applicant has to say about whether you should hear it or not, and the reasons for that.
Is there any chance we could put it into part 2 and it not be anonymous?
My understanding is, I think Councillor Soames' microphone is off. I don't know if he was trying to speak. My understanding from the officer just then was that it was the request of the individual that it be kept anonymous, rather than that anonymity being because of any particular part 2 reason. Of course, one of the reasons for dealing with matters in part 2 is that the details of an individual will be given, so that could be a consideration, but it may be that the licensing officer would need to find out from the resident whether they're happy for their details to be disclosed to the people who would be in that part 2 meeting. So I think you would need the licensing officer's position on that, and I think a hand may be up to that effect.
Yes. Karen, your hand is up. Could I ask you to speak, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chairman. That's absolutely fine. I think we will leave it. The person who made the representation fully understood from an email exchange we had this morning that unless all parties were in agreement, and I did say it was quite likely that if the details weren't going to be disclosed, that it was very late and for her to come back to me, and that it was most likely that we would not be able to possibly put this forward. She fully understands that it was a case of if all parties were in agreement, she would have liked me to have read out the text of the email. She doesn't want her name disclosed. I do have her name and her address, but she doesn't want that to be disclosed. So I think in that case, we take the advice. We take Mr. Payne's comment that he doesn't want that brought forward, and I'm happy to move on with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Karen, did you wish to bring somebody else in now to speak?
I think, thank you, Chairman. I think probably if we follow the hearing procedure, provided that Irene Kearns, Adam Davis and the police are all given their opportunity to speak so you can hear their evidence, then I'm absolutely happy with that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, now we have the opportunity for the panel to ask questions. So first of all, can I go to Sarah Kerr? Do you have a question?
I have a lot. If I maybe do just a handful now and then give someone else an opportunity, but do please come back to me afterwards. I'm just trying to think where to start, really. With regards to the law on this and the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, when I read through it, I can't see in there that a reason for refusal is lack of landowner permission. So am I correct in understanding from the law, Karen, that that isn't actually a reason for refusal?
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Yes, good question. To answer that, it's not covered in the legislation. It is covered in working in Borough Council street trading conditions, one of which requires that landowner permission is provided for any application.
Okay, so a couple of things on that. In order for those council conditions to actually come into effect, surely a licence needs to be issued for those conditions to be there. Is that right?
Yes, which is why we have refused the consent on that basis. No landowner permission. Therefore, we have refused to. We had to refuse to renew the consent.
But if there's no licence that's been agreed, then that condition hasn't come into effect in theory. Is that right?
No, it was on the previous consent, which was valid until the 30th of November 2019. And this, in fact, it's not a new application, it's a renewal application.
Okay, no, that's fine. And with regards, are you aware of any other authorities around the country that don't have that as a condition? Are we alone in having that as a condition, or is it quite common practice?
I would have assumed that it's quite common practice. It would be perhaps wrong to allow somebody to trade when you knew that they didn't have permission to be on that particular piece of land. So whether it's highways land or whether it's privately owned land, as in this case, and where the council happened to be the landowner, whichever place somebody is looking to trade from, what we would always do is we would always seek to establish that they had permission to be there in the first place.
Okay. Under the law, under the Local Government Act, miscellaneous provisions, obviously there are a number of reasons why a licence can be refused. And one of those is if there is not enough space in the street for the applicant to engage in the trading in which he decides to engage without causing undue interference or inconvenience to persons using the streets. Looking at the objections that have been raised, could this surely have been interpreted as a reason for refusal? And if so, why was that not the reason for refusal?
May I suggest that Ben Dufour has his hand raised, so I think he probably has a legal point he wishes to make at this point. Okay. With your permission, Chairman.
Yes, Ben.
It's important when we look at the regulations or the law in this respect that we focus on what we're dealing with here, which is a street trading consent as opposed to a street trading licence. Those particular reasons for refusal, whilst they might be relevant to a decision to grant or refuse a street trading consent, they are those that are specified in respect of a street trading licence, which is not what we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with here is a street trading consent. And what the law says on that, just so that everybody hopefully is clear, it's dealt with under paragraph 7 of Schedule 4 to, I think it's the 1982 Miscellaneous Provisions Act. Let me just check that I've got that right. Yes, 1982 Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and it's paragraph 7. And street trading consents are a rather broad discretion because what subparagraph 2 says is that subject to subparagraph 3 below, the council may grant a consent if they think fit. So you can do what you think fit. Subparagraph 3, which is referred to, says that a street trading consent shall not be granted to a person under the age of 17 years, or for any trading in a highway to which a control order under section 7, which I don't think you need to worry about for present purposes, other than to trading which the control order does not apply. So subparagraph 3 I don't think is relevant here, so you can do what you think is fit. And when doing so, you can, when granting or renewing a street trading consent, you can attach such conditions to it as you consider to be reasonably necessary. And then there are examples of the conditions which you can attach in subparagraph 5, which says that without prejudice to the generality of subparagraph 4, so without prejudice to the broadness of subparagraph 4, the conditions that may be attached to a street trading consent include conditions to prevent the obstruction of the street or danger to persons using it, or nuisance or annoyance, whether to persons using the street or otherwise. You can also vary the conditions of a street trading consent at any time, or the council can, and it can be revoked at any time. So the particular examples that you were referencing are those which apply specifically to street trading licenses rather than consents. And with street trading consents, it's left rather broader.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I've got that clarification now. I wanted to question a little bit as well about the complaints around this. So there's obviously 2 licensing. There was the 1 complaint in September 2017. Am I right in thinking that this complaint came from a council officer?
It was a council officer who dealt with it. I believe it originally came from a resident, and it was investigated by a council officer. Right.
Okay. So was the complaint made by the resident directly to licensing to the PPP, or did it go to the council that then made its way to you guys?
I'm not able to answer the specifics of that particular complaint, I'm afraid, because I didn't deal with that one.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to establish is, obviously there have been other complaints that necessarily haven't come to you guys, and I'm wondering if there's, just because there's only been 1 complaint, does that not necessarily mean there hasn't been more, they've just not made their way to you? Would, if any complaints were made to the council that were licensing, they've automatically have come to you guys, or is there possible that some have been missed?
I think any complaint that came in that was relating to street trading would be seen as a licensing complaint and would be referred to licensing, such as that one.
Okay, so the other complaints that we've seen in the agenda are more to do with the landowner permission side of things.
I think we'd need to again look at exactly where those complaints were directed to.
Okay, thank you. I have got some more.
Can I ask Emma? Just to go to Emma for a couple of questions.
I think one of my questions has been answered by Councillor Kerr. I only have one concern. Why has it, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, why has it taken so long to change the 2 people from Mr. X and Mr. Y to be dismissed and a new Mr. Z and Mr. A to be taken on, when this is, and this, as I understand it, and I'm sorry, but the microphone did break up a little bit, this only happened within the last week? That's my main question.
Thank you.
Karen, are you able to answer that?
Chairman, are you happy for me to answer that?
Yes, if you would, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. To confirm that notification came in at 5:05 yesterday evening. So it was yesterday. And I think the reason for that, I would suggest that perhaps with your permission, Chairman, I would like to put that to the appellant. Yeah,
that's fine. Do you want to do that at this stage, or would you like to do it later on in the meeting? Should
we do it now while the question's being asked?
Yes. So you're asking the appellant himself, or his legal advisor?
Mr. Masaloglu should answer that question.
Okay, Mr. Masaloglu, would you like to answer the question that Karen Colt was just presented?
Yes, Chairman, I will do that. The reason for this, this is the particular business that you cannot find quality person who can do this kind of cooking, and it's so hard to find someone specialities doing this kind of job, because it's evening and the long hours and nobody willing to do that, and we have really difficulties to find this kind of people to employ. Therefore, it's taken a bit longer than as I thought, but finally I find my old staff, they used to work here years and years back, and they're willing to come back on the board, and they did. And that's why it's been taking so long.
Thank you very much. Okay, Emma Hobbs, are you happy with that?
I still find it a little bit I find it confusing why it's taken so long.
Can anybody hear me?
I will. Okay. I thank you very much anyway for the response.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
I've lost connection.
Hello.
Have I?
Bill, you've frozen. Was that heard? Was my response heard?
No, I didn't hear that. Sorry. Can you say that again?
I just find it. Thank you very much for your response, but I do find it. I find it a bit baffling why it's taken so long to recruit 2 new people, and then suddenly the night before the hearing, they have a recruitment. But that's something I've made a note of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. If I could just ask, sorry, who's wishing to come in? I can't see an indication.
Chairman, I'm sorry. I'm trying to find the little hand symbol to get my hand up, but it won't work. It's Mr. Payne. I just need to come back on this particular point about why it's so late. Quite clearly, we have a situation here where the police lodged no objections to the initial application, and then very late in the day we have this letter from Thames Valley Police that's been provided, which you will be aware we object to, which names certain individuals. So having received that, it's taken a little while for Mr. Musoglu to identify replacement staff, and actually it's not taken that long in the scheme of things since this letter was received to identify new staff and to seek their engagement.
Thank you. Matt Lewin, did you wish to speak? That's hand raised.
Morning, Chair. Just briefly, I think, can I make a suggestion that this is better dealt with in the part 2 section of the meeting, because we're talking about information that's come from the police, I think.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's fine, thank you. If I can just ask Karen Colt a question. We have a number of these street trading licences issued around the borough, and a couple of points for objection and complaints relate to lack of sanitary facilities. Now, I would think that would apply to many of the licensed street traders that we have in the borough, and there are a number of issues that have been raised against Mr. Mersalugo, which may well be consistent with other street traders. Do you actually have any details of how the other street traders operate?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, good question, and this has certainly been asked before. There's no formal requirement for either under health and safety legislation or under the street trading for the trader to actually provide his own facilities. What tends to happen is they all have their own kind of local arrangements. It may be they use a local pub or a local 24-hour garage or something along those lines. So again, it may be that we could put that back to Mr. Mersaloglu to specifically answer the question about what facilities they do use locally.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can ask that when Mr. Mersalugo gives his appraisal. Thank you. Let's go back to Sarah, shall we? You had a couple more points. Sorry, who's?
I think Adam's going to talk
yes,
as well.
Yes, Matt Lewin. Sorry, Matt Lewin?
I meant to put my hand down. I've just done it.
Okay. Sorry, Sarah, come back to you.
Okay. Firstly, so I've just got a few comments here. Why was the applicant moved from St Paul's Parish Rooms?
Sorry, was that from or to St Paul's Parish Rooms?
From. We can see why he was moved away from the Reading Road initially. He was moved to St Paul's Parish Rooms, but I'm not sure why he had to move from there.
I think there were local issues with the St Paul's church management. Does that answer the question?
Well, not really, but
it was not seen. It was done on agreement with the church. It was not seen as a long-term solution. I think they were in fact doing it to try and help him out. Again, Mr. Mersaloglu may wish to comment on your question, but it wasn't seen as a long-term solution by any means.
Okay, I can ask that question again at the meeting.
Thank you.
With regards to applying for a renewal of the street trading consent, I note that it was a little over 2 weeks that the applicant put in the application form. I'm trying to understand actually how long this process takes. I mean, how long is a consultation period needed for this? And ideally, how long does licensing need to process an application, please?
Thank you. Yes, obviously we send out the renewal reminders as early as possible. We work in effect backwards from the expiry date. So you've got the expiry date. We need to factor in the 21 days for consultation, which goes out, and then before that, obviously, there needs to be a short period of time for the application to be received within the licensing team, checked, validated, and prepared for the consultation email to go out, and also for the site notices to be issued to the applicants. So those need to be prepared, sent out, ready for them to display. So yeah, it's a good month's process. So we try and get applications in as soon as we can before the renewal.
Okay, so basically the length of time that was given when the application was put in actually wasn't even long enough for the consultation period before the licence expired, is basically what you're saying.
I agree, yes, it was very tight. If you note that the application was made on the 14th of November, when the consent actually expired on the 30th, it was quite a tight turnaround, yes.
Okay. Other than letters being sent to the applicant, did anyone from the county reach out to the applicants and maybe start a more to try and come to an serves both interests?
I'm sorry, that was really crackly at that point. Can I ask you to repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sorry. Other than letters being sent to the applicant, did anyone from the council or licensing actually reach out to the applicant and start a friendly dialogue to try and come to an arrangement that serves both interests?
Sorry, other than who?
Sorry, Bill, could you just put your
yes.
phone on mute for a moment, please? Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's really breaking up, and I kind of
no, sorry.
I think I missed the important part about other than someone.
Other than letters being sent,
yes.
And did actually anyone reach out and have a conversation with the applicant to try and come to an arrangement?
With regard to the renewal application being made, or?
Yes, the renewal application was made, and then obviously it was due to withdrawal of landowner consent. The licence couldn't be renewed. Obviously, that was put in a letter. Was any sort of friendly dialogue started other than the formal letters with the applicants actually sort of say, look, this is the situation, let's try and work to actually get a solution, or has it all been done through formal letters?
Yeah, basically, yes. Once property came to us and we explained the situation, there was then dialogue between property and Mr. Mersaloglu, and I expect Irene Kearns would probably like to comment on that, and possibly Mr. Mersaloglu as well. But yes, from the agenda pack, you will have seen that there was an ongoing dialogue between November and January.
It's quite hard to see that from the agenda. I can see that a phone call has been made, but obviously no details as to the phone call. But that's it. It seems to have been formal letters and emails rather than let's sit down and sort of work something out. But with regards to that phone call, what I'm trying to understand is on the 28th of November, a letter was sent out to say that the last day of trading would be 4th of December. After that, a month's licence was then offered. It looks like from the agenda pack that this may have been down to pressure from local councillors, potentially saying, can we not offer some kind of extension or something? But firstly, can you confirm if that's the case? Is it typical for a month's extension to be granted? And whether any conditions in place in that licence, other than what's written in the licence, to say this is what I'm trying to establish, was it very clear to the applicant that that was a month's extension in order to give him time to find somewhere else? Because that's not written in the licence.
I think those questions, in effect, we throughout the process, we kept Mr. Mersloglu informed by email of what was going on. I think actually, can I ask Irene Kearns to answer your question, because it was property who were dealing with Mersloglu on this issue of landowner consent. We were aware that landowner consent wasn't being provided at that point, but the ongoing discussions were very much between property and Mr. Mersloglu. So perhaps would you like to ask Irene Kearns to answer that question?
I will ask that question of Irene when we come to that part of the agenda. But from a licensing perspective, when that license was offered to Mr. Mersloglu, was he informed by licensing the conditions that this was in order to find somewhere else?
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets confusing. That at that point was not licensing's involvement. When we're talking about a license, that in effect is the property agreement license that's being referred to. That wasn't the street trading consent license that we're talking about. So this was very much the issue between the dialogue between property and licensing. This wasn't a street trading license we were offering at that stage. That was the property issue. And if that had been accepted and agreed, at that point we could have then issued a 1-month street trading consent to mirror that property agreement. So does that help clear? I'm sorry, I know it's confusing because there are in effect 2 types of licenses being talked about.
Okay, no, that answers that. So I will ask that later on in the agenda. And finally, with regards to the consultation aspect of this, back in 2016, I don't know if you're aware, and if there's anyone actually in the meeting that can answer this, but it says in the agenda that the relevant service manager back in 2016 wasn't consulted with regards to the suitability of the location. I'd firstly like to know why not, and in subsequent renewals, has the relevant service manager, which, obviously we're talking children's services here, was the relevant service manager consulted in these cases?
Okay, I can answer the first part, going back to November 2016. That there were many people involved in those discussions at that time, and the agreement actually came through Claire Lawrence, who was the head of service and still is, and Paul Anstey, who at that time was the public protection partnership manager. So in effect, the equivalent of who is Sean Murphy now. And that, in effect, the dialogue was between them. That was then agreed, and that was then the agreement for the location. I think to go on from that, I think possibly you might like to ask Adam Davis to clarify if a little bit more about what the children's services involvement was from that point onwards.
I was going to say, because back in 2016, neither the 2 people that you've mentioned there were anything to do with children's services. So I'm just wondering if back then they actually had any say in the matter.
There were very many people involved in those discussions at that time. Yeah,
there were.
Yeah. There were local councillors involved in the discussions, and eventually the agreement was reached between, as I say, Claire Lawrence and Paul Anstey for public protection, and we were advised that yes, this location had been agreed. So we moved forward on that basis.
Can you, obviously we're talking people here that aren't children's services though. The councillors aren't children's services either. Was there somebody of some Adam's equivalent, because Adam wasn't in the service then, of Adam's equivalent or the head of children's services at the time in 2016 that definitely was part of that discussion and agreed to it?
Well, our instruction to proceed that on an agreed location came from Paul Anstey, who was the public protection partnership manager.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair, I wonder whether I might interject. Unfortunately, I've tried to raise my hand, but the little symbol's ghosted out on my computer.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully, councillors, you will have read the submissions that I've made, and you will see that there is.
Well, can I just?
Yes.
Can I just interrupt you, because I'm going to come to you very shortly to state your case. Perhaps it might be better for you to raise that then. I'm coming to you very shortly.
I was just trying to deal with the points as they arise, and I just thought it might be helpful to deal with that particular point about consultation as it had arisen.
Okay, we'll do that one, and then we can move on. But do that if you'd like to ask that. Yes.
Indeed, in my submission,
Okay.
you'll see there's reference to an email from Claire O'Leary, who was the service manager for targeted learning, and there is a comment there that she was consulted, and she was certainly in agreement with the site being used.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions from the panel before we move on to the next item on the agenda?
No, not from me.
No. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can we move on now and ask the applicant or his representative to present their case, please? As Mr. Masalogo or the representative.
Chairman, I think probably the way to deal with this is if I start and then hand to Mr. Masoglu for certain aspects of what we need to say to you. First of all,
thank you.
The ground. I'm sorry.
Sorry, carry on. Yes.
Very
carry
well.
on.
It is quite clearly set out and spelt out that the ground for refusal here was the lack of landowner's consent. There was no other reason at all. The danger that we face today is that we get drawn into and consider matters that actually are not relevant to that ground of refusal. And I'm conscious we've already touched on a few points. The email, I'm obliged to Karen Court for putting this in the report. On page 9 of the officer report, it says there was no technical reason for refusal of the consent other than withdrawal of the landowner consent. And then the email that she sent on the 3rd of December says quite clearly, once this is resolved, we will then be in a position to determine your street trading consent renewal application and will be in touch with you at that point. So the question is, at the time of application, was there consent for the use of this site? And I shall deal with this in a moment, but absolutely there was. Now, Councillor Kerr very astutely raised the point about why is landowner consent required? It's required because of a condition on the licence. I'm sorry, not the licence, the consent. The position when the application was made back in November was quite clearly there was landowner consent. The applicant was entitled at that time to apply for the licence. He had consent, and it wasn't until the 13th of January that an attempt was made, I say erroneously, to cancel that consent, and then the decision was made the following day. But the point is very valid that a condition only takes effect once the consent has been granted. It's not a matter of having a retrospective consent here. At the time the application was made, at the application that at the time the application could have been determined, there was consent in place. So if we could just look at what consent was granted. I think probably the nub of this comes down to a number of emails that we've already provided you, and that is admitted by Property Services if you look on page 145 in an email where it says, in a nutshell, WBC offered him this site informally some years ago, and there's been trading there ever since. Earlier on, when this matter was being considered and when the movement from the previous site was being considered, you will see that there's an email from Mr. Anstey on the 2nd of November 2016, which says, currently the council are recommending a pitch outside the youth centre car park, inside the youth centre car park. Should you proceed with this option, then please let me know. That option indeed was taken up. On the 11th of November 2016, we've got a email from Councillor Ashwell, who's was the executive member for Plan, and said that he'd spoken to Alex Dean, and this is recorded, that there was permission to go into the car park. On the 16th of November, there was a further email, and the agreement was said to be to locate within the youth centre car park, and that the van will be parked on the left-hand side, and the customers will have to come completely into the car park to trade. So, in essence, it seems that there can be no doubt that when the application was made, and indeed throughout the point up to at least the 13th of January, when the application should have been determined by then, there was the ability to trade, there was landowner consent. Now, I am very conscious that there is a danger that we move into the grounds of trying to determine whether the council should continue to give consent or should offer some new license to occupy. But that's not what this hearing is about. This hearing is about whether a street trading consent should be given, not whether there should be landlord's consent to be given. They are two very different issues. And I come back to the point that was made at the very beginning, that this is an application where consent should only be refused because there wasn't permission from the landowner at the time of application. That's not the truth. Now, if we do look at the grounds for which landowner consent is now said to be removed, this stems from an email on 28th November where it was said that the location of your van in the grounds of the Youth and Community Centre is not compatible with the activities of the Youth and Community Centre, whatever that means. It's not compatible. That doesn't suggest that there were any problems, and it's not until the 13th of January that we have problems reported. Now, at this point, I think it's probably helpful for me to bring in Mr. Nosoglu to answer some of the points that are raised. On the 13th of January, there are a number of issues that are raised, and if I can perhaps go through these point by point. The first one is that during the summer, customers eating kebabs were seen throwing kebabs and rubbish over the tennis courts while shouting obscenities towards staff and a group of young people. Mr. Nosoglu, I wonder whether you might like to comment on that particular point.
Yes, I will do that. Yeah, sometimes, yes. Our customers, they came and throw the rubbish on the floor. Yes, they do. And what we do is we clear up as soon as we see those rubbishes, or before we leave the site, we clear everything top to bottom and we leave it in a perfect condition for the next day. So also they're saying that they throw the rubbish to the tennis courtyard. And there's the fences is in the tennis courtyard is about 5 meters, maybe more than 5 meters tall. I don't think anyone can throw that carton box, which is not very heavy, to throw over the 5-6 meters on top of the fences to the courtyard. And I think this allegation is just, baseless, really. So, as I said, every night after we finish this trading, we clear up the place top to bottom and we move on for the next day. This is what I can say for
Mr. Nosoglu, I wonder if you could just explain to the committee what you would do if you observed customers doing that or shouting obscenities towards members of the public.
What we do is we step in and we tell them not to do that, and can you please move on, and we don't serve them. And usually we handle the case really, really good, and they move on. And even if they throw a rubbish around and we tell them not to do it, and then with no argument and everything, they take their food, and then they respect us, we respect them. Yes, sometime in the night, yes, we have people who's been drinking alcohol and they come up to have a food. Yes, we know how to handle them, we know how to serve them. And so far we have no problem from the public, except one in the past, about 2-3 months before. Other than that, we have no issue with the littering. We clean up the sites every day with the after the trading hours, and before we go anywhere, we clear up. and then we move on for the next day, as I said.
Thank you. Yep, thank you. So, councillors, you'll be aware that there was a complaint about littering. That was investigated by the council. No action was taken on that. And during the course of 3 years, there has been that one complaint. I would suggest that if there had been a problem with rubbish over the tennis courts and rubbish in the general area, that would have resulted in more complaints, which simply have not materialised. The second issue that was raised was customers smoking cannabis in the car park. I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that.
Well, yes, some customers, they come and they smoke illegal, cannabis or whatever they're smoking, I don't know. And we refuse to serve them. We say, look, don't do it here. If you want to smoke, go smoke somewhere else. And we refuse to serve them. And as a matter of fact, about, I would say 2.5 months ago, one chap, he came, he was smoking and then blowing his smoke inside the van and throwing his ash in the van. And we said to him, basically, don't do it. And then he started being abused. But we handled him and he went away. What he did is he called the police and he says, oh, those people attacked me. They pull a knife on us and everything. And the police stepped in. They came in. They search and then they make a investigation for this allegation. My two staff has been taken to the police station. Well, what we find out after it, and this story was basically again, it's been this guy being refused to serve. That's why he's trying to take it out from us. So the police has dismissed the case as far as I know, and then we moved on. So this is what we do. If anybody smokes illegal stuff or do illegal things, we refuse to serve them. We tell them move on. So this is what we do.
Thank you. The third point that was raised, which perhaps comes back to a question that was asked earlier, was that customers or people related to the burger van were urinating in the car park. That's the first point. I wonder whether you'd like to deal with that.
Well, I mean, again, if you see anybody doing this, we tell them not to. I mean, what we do is after we finishing our trading, if you see anybody urinating around, we wash it. And we tell them not to, and that's all we can do. I mean,
forgive me for interrupting. I just want to check that Councillor Hobbs is still on the line because she's disappeared from my screen, and it's important. She's back now.
I am here. Sorry, it's the volume, which I'm just turning the camera off at the moment because it's the volume. I think the camera's interfering with the volume, so I'm just turning off, but I will turn it back on.
Just want to make sure that you can hear and be heard.
I can hear it a lot clearer. Thank you.
Yes. Again, we tell the public not to do that, and we stop serving this kind of people, and we try to handle them. And if they do urinating around, I mean, I haven't seen it, and we wash it afterwards. Urinating in the town center, they do it everywhere, regardless. I mean, this is the culture, I don't know, the public they do. We cannot handle them. I mean, we can only tell them not to do it. I mean, we cannot enforce them. We cannot do anything about it. All we can do is not to serve and tell them not to do it. That's all we can do. Other than that, we call the police. But the police, they wouldn't come because of this minor situation and they just ignore, so we stopped doing that. And for us to be using toilets, I'd just like to make a comment with this. Literally, I live 1 minute away from my business. If anything we need to go toilet, anything like that, we just come home, my home, which is in the Clifton Road, and we do what we need to do and we go back to the work again. So literally, I'm 1 minute away from where I trade. So there is no toilet issue whatsoever.
You have facilities. Very well. There is a suggestion that people have been seen, whether they are customers or other users of the car park, driving in and out of the car park at speed. What can you say about that?
Yeah, well, the car park is not a massive car park. I mean, from the road to where we trade, is no more than 20 meters. I mean, even if you drive in Formula One car, you cannot speed that far anyway. I mean, I'm a driver last 30, 35 years, and I know what to do, and I know. And you can never speed in that car park whatsoever, because there's not enough space to speed. From the main road to the no way you can speed. So I think this allegation is based again.
Very well. Have you or your staff, to your recollection, seen people trying to speed in the car park?
Well, we haven't noticed. I mean, our customers usually they are family men, family people. They come with their own car, nicely, calmly, and they do their shopping and they go. I mean, I haven't seen anyone speeding. I mean, yes, they do speed. They do speed on the main road, but probably this allegation is doing with the main road, really, not in the car park.
The next allegation.
Sorry. Yeah, there's no way you can do it. If you're a driver, if you've seen the place, probably you know everybody. You know this place. You know the car park. You know how car park is so little. There is no way you can speed in it. This is what I have to say.
Thank you. The next suggestion is that on occasion there have been people under the influence of alcohol trying to access the youth centre while activities are taking place. First of all, I wonder if you can explain to the committee whether you sell alcohol or whether indeed these people are possibly anything to do with your business.
No, we don't sell alcohol. Myself, I don't drink alcohol. I mean, I'm against it anyway. If any people drink alcohol, and if I see them, if they're my customers, I will tell them I refuse to serve them. I refuse. I just say, please move on. And I have never seen anyone is going into the youth club with alcohol and everything. I haven't witnessed. It's not my customer because I am parking, I'm right in front of the car park, which is close to the main road. And the youth club at the back, about 30 meters back. So there is no reason my customer would go there and cause a problem. My customer only comes to my van. They don't go back to where the youth club is. So I don't think it's my customer or it's nothing to do with us.
Okay. Now, the next allegation is that there is an issue with rubbish, including overflowing bins, and rats have been seen in the car park. Well, as we know, you're never that far from a rat, but what are your arrangements with refuse disposal?
Well, as I said, after we trading, we clear area top to bottom, not only car park, we do the main road as well. I mean, we don't only pick our stuff, we pick any stuff, because I'm really fussy with this. I'm fussy with the cleaning and everything, and I clean everything, and I pick up any rubbish on the road, and I will tell my staff to pick it up as well. And before we leave this spot, we leave it that place perfect condition for next day. So we think when it comes to the rat, I haven't seen it myself. Yes, there must be some, because this is nature where we park. There is a footlands, there is the trees. Yes, there must be some, but it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah. So over what sort of area would you do a litter pick when you finish business?
Well, we in the week time we finish it about 1:30. So we take everything out. We take about 20 minutes. If it's time, it will take longer. So we clear everything, not only outside, inside the van, inside the car park, and we also empty the bins in the where on the street. We take it away. It's close by to our business, so we won't leave any stuff around. Exception, yes, I did notice when we serve the customers takes the stuff and eat it by the whole lane. There is a one bin area, and I noticed next day I was passing by, the birds come and takes the bins, food or whatever they left in the bin and take it out. Of course, there's a little mess. We can see which, as soon as we see it, we take them out again. I mean, we don't leave, as far as I understand, we don't leave any rubbish around. We like to clear everything as soon as we see it, all the time. Not only time, all the time.
Now, you'll have seen in the pack that there are some photographs of some fast food containers within bins, but interestingly not scattered over the car park. Do you have your own bins that you provide?
Yes, we do. We have a container, and every night we take our rubbish, take it to our container and dispose it. And we pay for it.
You pay for that,
and we don't use council's bins, anything like that, no.
The final reason that is suggested for landowners' consent being withdrawn is that it's suggested that staff and colleagues have had their, this is of the youth centre, have had their cars deliberately blocked in by the kebab van if they're there after 4:30. What can you tell the committee about that?
Well, this is again based on the situation. We have not deliberately blocked nobody. Yes, sometimes people park after 5 o'clock. What we do is we pull up. As soon as they arrive, they ask, can you remove your van? We're happy to move it, and we let them go, and we carry on normally. I mean, I wouldn't like to block anybody because the car should go so I can park it properly close to the main road where I'm supposed to be parking, so people can see me that I'm trading. I mean, if I block somebody, so that means I'm parking my van far back and no one will see it. So why should I block people? I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that in a million years. I'm really, getting well with the youth club workers and also the council workers, which sometimes they come and park their car. And also community, some of them people, they come and park their car. They got no reasons to be in the youth club. What they do, they take a train, they go to their work. I mean, we never block anybody. We don't do that. Why should we do it? There's no reason.
I'm sorry, are you saying that there are other people using the car park other than those using the centre?
Yes, definitely, every day. I mean, some people, they don't want to pay, car parks in where the station is. This is free of charge. They come and park it and they go. I mean, during the day, I mean, you have been there, John, you witnessed it yourself. Sometimes the car park is full and youth club is empty because people park their car, they go work and they take a train, they go wherever they need to go. So everybody using that car park. It's not the youth club. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of youth clubs workers parking their car. I mean, I don't know how many they're working up there. I believe no more than 4 or 5. I mean, that car park is capacity probably 50 cars. So I don't see any reason. Most of the cars, they park there. They are the visitors of them stations. It's nothing to do with the youth club. People come and park their car and they go to work from that, and they come after 5 o'clock. And those people, whenever they come, and then if I'm behind them, they politely ask me, can you move your van so I can go? I say, yeah, no problem. Drop down, we do it straight away. We have no allegation for that. I mean, we have no any complaints so far. I mean, myself, I'm a really calm person. I'm really, polite person. I mean, I don't think I have any issue with anybody. So if anybody comes and then asks me to remove their car, yeah, I'm willing to do that straight away, no problem. So I don't think this is really good accusation. I think, again, it's baseless.
Thank you. Now, having commenced the process for this hearing, we've obviously received a number of other statements and documents, and the council has attempted to bolster its position by making a number of other suggestions as well. On page 64, there's the reference to having or the appropriateness of having a takeaway food provider working in the car park of a youth and community centre. And we can see that Mr. Davis has said that I object to the renewal based on my own observation and concerns regarding the appropriateness of this co-location, together with the concerns expressed and shared by Caroline Heap. Now, some of those concerns are expressed as the flow of customers and cars in and out of the youth and community centre car park. Mr. Masoglu, how many cars do you think you would roughly get during the course of an evening from patrons coming in? Have you got any idea?
Well, most of our trade is after 6 to 8, where the family, they want to have their own meals, and they order it. They order by the phone. If they drive in, they come and park it in 2 minutes. They take their stuff and they go. Yes, in a night, I would say whole night probably no more than 20 cars.
20 cars in the course of an evening, yeah. And do you have, presumably, therefore, you have customers?
Busy night, busy night.
Yeah.
Because most of our trade is walking. People walks around and they come and pick it up.
Yeah. Now, the second suggestion is that the car park is poorly lit. Would you agree with that?
No, because we clear up every night. As I said earlier, we clear any rubbish we see, any rubbish. It doesn't have to
sorry,
be installed.
I think you may have misheard me. The car park is poorly lit. The lighting in the car park isn't very good.
Yeah.
Would you agree? Would you agree?
It's not. No. What we have is we have a big floodlights being fitted, and then we pay for it, and we use our electric. So I don't think so. No.
So where is that floodlight situated?
Is where we trade a front of the van. It's very big one, massive one, and it's shiny.
And what about the rest of the car park? Is that lit at all?
Well, at the back, not really. No, I don't think I can say that because the lights all around.
Right. The third suggestion is that people are waiting to be served, either together or in groups, and the people are sat in their cars eating. Well, I think it's unavoidable, of course, that people will wait to be served and may eat together or in groups. That's a rather peculiar thing to say. But people sat in their cars eating. Is that your experience, that people buy food, sit in their cars, and then drive off?
Well, yeah, you have some time to time. Yeah, people, sit down and eat it, but as I said, this my customer mainly is family people, so they buy their food, they take it home and eat at home. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 workers, they came, like a road workers or ambulance or police or whoever, they come and then they take stuff. Maybe they eat it in the car park, and then they take their rubbish. If they don't, they bin it with us, or even if they throw it on the floor, we go and pick them up.
Very well. I think
I mean, we don't see a lot of car parking in the car park having their meal. We don't see it.
Well,
maybe.
I think that probably brings us on to the point about the suggestion that car park bins are often filled with takeaway rubbish and food the next morning. Food wrappings are often left on the floor along with empty alcohol bottles. You've already dealt with the issue that you don't sell alcohol.
We don't
what
sell
can you say
alcohol,
about
no.
what can you say about the rubbish? I mean, you've already said quite a lot.
Well, as I said, if I see any rubbish, we pick it up straight away. As before we leave the spot, we leave it clear, nice, and tidy, in perfect condition for the next day. So we don't see any litters. We don't leave any litters around. We just pick them up.
So you mentioned earlier that you had your own bins, and the suggestion is that they are left on site and not emptied. Is that right or wrong?
No, we empty every night. Every night, regardless.
I think the final matter, we've dealt with parking, which is listed on that representation as well. The final matter is to do with electrics. Can you just describe the situation with your electrical supply? How's that arranged?
We have electric point, and we use our electric. We have electric meter up there. It's nothing to do with youth club. and I paid lots of money to remove them from my old spot to the new spot, and we done all the wiring and everything is regulated, and then we use our electric. There's nothing much to say. We have our box, it's very safe, and every night we came, open up and plugged in, and at night we close it and we go. And we don't use an electric from whatsoever from the youth club. We have our electric meters, and I can provide you bills and everything, no problem.
Thank you. It's probably helpful if I go through some of the further history on this particular matter. There was a complaint in 2017, which was investigated. That quite clearly was resolved. There was reference to an incident in 2017 which wasn't reported, and of course that appears also to have been resolved. We are in the situation where, despite those particular issues which were raised, the license, the consent was indeed renewed in 2017, 2018, 2019. So despite these issues having been suggested in the past, quite clearly it was considered that there was nothing to that. There was an opportunity for issues to be raised at renewal, and we can see on page 72, there's an email from Jane Quires on the 31st of October, which gave that opportunity. So the question really is, what's different between 2018, when the consent was last renewed, and now? What we suggest is absolutely nothing, except that the council has now sought to, in its words, use licensing to try and get rid of the trader. And you will see that there are emails that refer to that within the pack. On the 29th of November, Councillor Shepherd-Bray wrote an email, and that is in the pack on page 107, to say that this is a popular venue and I have not heard of any problems happening at this location. I would rather suspect if there had been problems, then the councillor would know about it. On December the 4th, Sean Murphy wrote to say that this is resolved. We will now issue a street trading consent on page 99. So the reality is with all of this that actually these issues that were reported were not issues at all, and they continue not to be issues at all. And they are no different to the situation when the council was willing to grant a consent in the past. Really, the issue is set out on page 109, where there is an email which basically says the council do not now want him to continue to trade from where he is. That's the long and the short of it. The email from Claire Lawrence that's in the pack is quite telling. CLT has instructed us to get rid of this van from the youth club car park, and if we use the licensing legislation. So that's what's happening here. This is not a valid reason for refusing consent. It is actually a matter for property to deal with under their regime, not under the licensing regime. At page 114, there's a further email. The refusal by the council to extend Mrs. Masoglu's licence seems rather strange. No explanation seems to have been given why, after 3 years, it's no longer possible for him to stay at the youth centre car park. Well, we now have a little bit of information as to why it's said that landlord's consent cannot be given, but actually that is not relevant in terms of considering this consent for this application for consent. I'm not going to deal with the issues raised by the police because I understand that's going to be dealt with in a part 2 hearing. I will reiterate the point to say that we do object to the police seemingly changing their position, but the marker is that on the 21st of November the police wrote to say that there were no objections to the renewal of this consent. as I say, we'll deal with those incidents that are reported now in a separate section if you are minded to consider them. I'm terribly sorry.
Thank you very much.
My computer has just frozen. Just one moment, if you would. So in summary, the situation is that it is very clear that the council gave permission for the site to be used. It's very clear that learning services were involved and had no objections, subject to a stipulation on parking. That forms the basis of the agreement. And the question is now, what has changed? Well, clearly the issue is something to do with the interaction that's now perceived between the van and the centre. If it had not been that, then the council would not have gone down the line of offering a temporary consent whilst the lockdown arrangements are in place for him to trade from the premises. It is abundantly clear, and I shall deal with this in the closing as well, that the real issue is that the council does not want a youth centre to have a fast food outlet within its car park whilst the premises is trading. If it were anything other, it wouldn't have offered that licence that it did earlier in the year. The whole situation here relies on conjecture and not any real evidence in our submission. There is no difference between 2018, 2019 and where we are now in terms of being able to give a consent for this venue. The van has operated, as you've heard, for a significant period of time without any real incidents. Had there been incidents over I think it's 28 years since they first started trading, I am sure that they would have been raised and there would have been enforcement action taken. There clearly hasn't. This is a situation where absolutely a consent should be granted, and there is no real evidence to suggest to the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. I think first of all, go to Emma. Do you have any questions, Emma?
I have one question. On page 68, 69 of your pack, it's noted that, and I'd just like to ratify this, that the van had no MOT. Is this accurate or not?
Okay. Sorry. Who wishes to answer?
Shall I answer it?
Sorry, people are breaking up. Could I ask if others could just turn the microphones on?
Yeah, Mr. Masalugu.
Yes, at the moment, yes, it's got MOT, road tax, and insurance has always been. And I can send you the proof right now if you like.
Okay, but why was it checked online, which, as we all know, can be done now, and it actually showed that there was no MOT, unless you've changed the van's number plate. That it had no MOT, no insurance, it wasn't valid, and this is since April 2019 to the end of the year. So could that be ratified to me, please?
Yes, there was some mixed up at the time. We have 5 different vans. We use it not for only trading as a kebab. We also use it for other purposes. And one of them was sworn, but mistakenly, instead of I sworn that van, I sworn the trading one by mistake. But at the time, it's got MOT and road tax. But I don't know, somehow it happened, and it was my fault, my clerical fault. So instead of I'm sworn in this vehicle, by mistake, I sworn the one we trade in. But as soon as I noticed, I've done it again and straight away. And the van has full MOT until next year, and the road tax and the insurance.
You say till next year, so that means it's only just been done then?
No, well, it's been done, I would say, almost 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay, so that would be this year, because everything's only done on a year.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, speech was staying until end of this year, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Could I just ask one question? You say you supply your own electric from the box. There's a photograph on page 68 which shows some concern over the way the cables are run from that box to your van, as though it wouldn't meet the current requirements. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, we had a Christmas lights we put up, and after the Christmas we didn't use it. I mean, we didn't want to take it off because we were going to put it again and again and again. We just left it. I mean, there is no connection with the electric, just the Christmas lights. That's all there was. So the main electric is secure, and it's been locked up during the day. When we use it, we open up, we hook up with the van, and we trade it. The rest of the was maybe 1 or 2 you can see. What's the name? Christmas lights, which we don't use it anymore. And anyway, when it's been comes to the light, I took them away and I disposed it. So there is no hanging any electric wires, anything like that at the moment.
Thank you. Sarah.
Chairman, sorry, could I just deal with the point
Yes.
of the photograph that's shown? What you have there is a picture of an extension lead, and you can see on the right-hand photograph there is somebody holding the plug. That's the bit that goes into the electric, of course, so that's not something that's live, and you've got an extension lead that is plugged in there. This is an installation that was installed by the electricity board. There is a separate agreement in place for that, and I believe that the electrical system has been tested and is safe. Certainly, if it's something that's of concern to you, it would not be outside your remit to put a requirement upon the consent that some form of electrical certificate is provided to demonstrate the safety of that installation.
Sorry, yes, that's right. I mean, I understand that most electrical installations that are used outside have to have a PAT testing. So I would imagine that would cover that area, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. These provisions are covered by the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Electricity at Work regulations. So indeed, there is legislation to deal with that. I'm conscious that in all the time that the van has been there, this is not an issue that's been raised by any health and safety inspector or food inspector that's been to the premises, to the van.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have a question?
As I'm sure you could probably tell, I've got several. Firstly, the initial questions I'm directing at Mr. Payne, just with regards to the legalities of all this. So you state in your submission on page 86 that neither of these criteria requires a landlord's consent to be obtained, and it is suggested that this is in part because a landlord has alternative powers that can be used to prevent access if required. Could you tell me what alternative powers landlords have, please?
Well, yes, indeed. Landlords, of course, have power to take action if there is trespass, but there are also normally powers that are involved in any lease. Now, that's a slight difficulty here because the only terms of the lease that there are in relation to parking of vehicles. But if there was a breach of that arrangement, then, of course, the landlord could enforce that. But the primary control is through trespass if there is no consent, and no such action has been taken. What I'm mindful of, and I suspect your questions might lead to this, is the question of whether a license or a consent indeed can be granted where there is no landowner's permission. And all I can do is refer you to a similar regime under the planning system, where quite clearly you do not need to have landowners' permission in order to submit a planning application and have that approved. Yes, you do have to notify, because there are specific requirements about that, the landlord or the owner of the building or the land, but there's no need to get consent. And likewise, in this legislation, there is no need to obtain landowner's consent before you apply for a consent.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying is the landowner could take legal action, but there's a couple of different routes, but it would be a legal action that they could take should someone be trading on their premises without consent. Yes,
indeed. It's a completely different regime, and one might say horses for courses, that if there is a concern that there is no consent, then the appropriate way for the landowner, and of course the council in this case, would be to take action for trespass.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, I did confirm what's written in the law earlier, and obviously you've written this in your submission as well. Could it not be seen, though, that common sense could be amiss here? So would there be much point in an authority issuing consent in the knowledge that the person who has that consent, as soon as they step foot onto that land, is in breach of the license, in breach of the consent, given that certainly in our authority that we're requesting landowner permission, and as such it would be down to the landowner to take legal action, in this case the landowner being the local authority, so they would then be spending taxpayers' money in order to take legal action, when surely if we had common sense at the beginning and to actually say, well, what's the point in not having the license if they're not going to be using it anyway? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, clearly there is a difficulty here because the council wears a number of hats, and I'm conscious that the reference to using taxpayers' money is obviously something that's of concern wearing one particular hat, but in the role of the licensing authority is probably not. What we say about that is that it is an entirely separate matter. Someone is entitled under the law to make an application. It's just as with the planning application, absolutely, one cannot go ahead and implement that unless the consents are in place. However, in this instance, what we had back in November was a situation where there was consent, and so therefore it should be possible to continue in future. Now, the council has also indicated that it would be willing to grant a limited consent for the future, and you will see in the papers that a licence was drawn up and offered. So clearly there is an opportunity for permission to be given, and one rather suspects that there might be, if the council was going to act in a reasonable way, an opportunity for continued trading, at least until the lockdown arrangements have concluded and the centre is opened. Now, it seems to us that it would be entirely reasonable for a period of notice to be given, and the trader should be allowed to continue at this particular location, at least while it's possible to try and negotiate and find another site. I'm conscious that there was a question asked as well. I do apologise, I'm slightly straying off the point here, about what interaction took place between the applicant and the council. There was indeed an effort to try and negotiate a new contract. And indeed, I and my firm tried to arrange meetings with Property Services over this. But unfortunately, Property Services were rather caught up with the question of whether there was consent already, and weren't willing to meet until that particular issue was resolved. Quite clearly, there were records, and they've been produced as part of the pack, that there was consent. So we have a slight difficulty that it would be wonderful to try and negotiate with the council to agree something on this site, but unfortunately the council has steadfastly refused to do so.
Okay, so the consent for use of the land, from what I can see in the submissions, is some ad hoc emails. There's no actual written document of consent from what I can see, and unless I can be proved otherwise. Now, a lot of what you've been talking about is obviously consent in that format was given back in 2016, and you list a number of people in there. I mean, some of the people that you're listing are no longer part of the council, and they're no longer there. And and officers and administrations do change. Now, nowhere in any of that consent was there anything about the length of this. I mean, while it's not got an end date and it's not for a certain period of time, it'd be wrong to presume that this was in perpetuity, and particularly as administrations do change. It's a bit like saying that local authorities can't go in different directions as administrations changed. So has there been a presumption that this is forever? I mean, do you not agree that it is possible for circumstances to make changes happen?
Well, yes, there are a number of points there. First of all, yes, it is possible that circumstances change, and that it might be that consent that was granted a number of years ago is no longer appropriate now. However, those changes need to be quite clearly documented, and our submission is that actually there have been no changes other than a change of officers within the council who now feel that it's inappropriate to have a burger van within the car park of a youth centre. In terms of whether it is possible to have an oral agreement, absolutely it is. That's recognised in law, that one can have an oral agreement for effectively a lease arrangement. That is what has existed. There has been a mix of emails, as you quite rightly pointed out, and I don't wish to cast stones, but had the council organised a proper written lease from the very outset, this issue might not have arisen. Essentially, what we have at the moment is an oral agreement that this van can occupy the car park for as long as it wants, subject to parking being made available and people parking to look at the to use the van on the car park on the left hand side as you go in. That's the terms of the agreement. Now, it is not unreasonable to have a written agreement, and indeed we have provided a draft agreement that Mr. Masoglu would be willing to sign with the council. That's not been accepted. What has been proposed by the council is, I'm afraid, a rather biased agreement that could be terminated practically immediately, and that for a trader is of no interest whatsoever. He just simply would not be interested in trading a continuing permission with one that can be terminated immediately and for practically any reason whatsoever. So it's not for the want of trying that we've attempted to enter into a written agreement. That would be much more sensible, and actually the way of resolving this would be to grant the consent at least until the point of renewal, to allow a proper agreement to be formulated in terms that can be agreed between the parties.
Okay. Sorry.
Sarah, I wonder if, just for a moment, we could go and to the licensing authorities. They may be able to bring up some answers or even extend the questioning. So could I just go to the licensing authority just to see what points they would like to raise themselves, and we'll come back to you shortly. So, Karen, do you have any questions you'd like to put to the applicant?
Yes, just a couple. Firstly, one to Mr. Mersaloglu. The current change in assistant nomination. Are you able to confirm, please, is the third nominated assistant staying on at the van?
Yes, at the moment.
Well, can you clarify for the moment?
Yes, he will be staying at the moment, but surely I will be changing all the assistant in the near future altogether.
Okay, and when will you be submitting that form that I sent to you last night?
Well, hopefully today, if not tomorrow morning.
It needs to be today, please, before they commence work on the van.
Yes. Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
do that this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions. Can I just go back to the conversation about the use of the toilet facilities? you said that you've got your local facilities very locally for your assistants to use. Can I just confirm, please, Mr. Mersaloglu, is that for all your assistants to use?
Yes, why not?
Yeah, okay. And would that be up to 3:30 in the morning when you close?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. A question about waste disposal, which has been discussed. On page 22, you're aware that on your consent you have a special condition number 3. Can you confirm what your trade waste contract agreement is, please?
We have a being contracted BIFA. They come and take every, I believe it's every 2 weeks. They come and take it, and we pay them regularly, £16, something like that, plus VAT.
Okay, and could you provide us with a copy of that that formal agreement?
I will do.
Okay.
I will.
Thank you. Okay, and then really, if I can just comment, Chairman, please, the questions about the negotiations on landowner consent. I think rather than perhaps the licensing authority answering those, because obviously it's not the licensing authority who can give landowner consent, may I ask that perhaps you put those questions to Irene Kearns in property?
Sorry, yeah, that's fine. Okay, yes. Right, okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. No further questions. Do you wish to point? Okay.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, let's move on. Does Irene wish to have any questions herself on this at this stage?
Chair, I'm going to ask some questions on behalf of Irene and Adam as well, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
So just for those watching, my name is Matt Lewin. I'm a barrister instructed on behalf of the Council's Estates Unit. So, Mr. Mersaloglu, I saw actually we've got a press cutting in the agenda. It's at, I don't know if you've got a copy to hand. It's at page 83, and I understand that the man that we can see in the inset photo with the uniform, that I understand is not you. Is that one of your assistants?
Well, I don't have any.
I wonder if Mr. Payne can help us out if Mr. Mersaloglu doesn't have it.
Yeah.
Yes, I can certainly help with that. That is not Mr. Mersaloglu.
That's one of the assistants?
It is indeed.
Okay, thank you. Now, I saw on on BBC the interview that Mr. Mersaloglu gave last week about this hearing, and again, I could see this assistant that we can see on page 83. Mr. Mersaloglu wasn't wearing a uniform, and he didn't seem to be working behind the van at the time. And my impression was that he doesn't work behind the van full time. Is that correct?
Well,
that's correct. That's the purpose of having assistants, of course.
So how often is Mr. Mersaloglu actually working on site, on average per week?
Can I answer this?
Please do.
Yeah. I work every night. I don't have to be necessarily in the van working, because we do delivery also, but I do work every night.
So you're not necessarily working at the van throughout the trading hours, is that right?
I do. But I don't have to be in the van all the time, because when the delivery comes, I usually take it and give it to the customer and come back within 10-15 minutes.
Okay. Well, the reason for my question is I'm told by Carolyn Heap, who's the centre manager, that she rarely, if ever, sees you at the van. So I'm just wondering how clear a view you can have of any of the issues that might be going on at the van if you're not there.
Well, I am there, so I don't know. If she hasn't seen me, I don't know. I can answer that question.
That's fine. Can we then have a look, please, at it's page 35 of the agenda. Again,
sorry, can you repeat that? What page was that?
Page 35, Councillor.
Thank you.
Now, I appreciate Mr. Mersaloglu doesn't have a copy of this in front of him, so obviously, Mr. Payne, feel free to step in as appropriate. We can see on the 4th of December, Irene Kearns, on behalf of the Estates Unit, emailed Mr. Masalalu, and she says, further to our conversation just now, so that suggests that they'd also had a phone conversation. Please find attached a licence to occupy land at Reading Youth and Community Centre. Now, the background to this is that permission had been withdrawn, and I think Councillor Kerr I think she said it, is right, that local ward members got involved, and officers changed their mind and offered a 1 month's licence, a written licence agreement, which replaced the informal agreement that was in place before then. But there was no response to that email, and I was wondering why Mr. Masalalu ignored that offer.
Well, perhaps I can just answer that. That's very simple. It's the point that I made earlier. The offer that was made was one that was not capable of acceptance. Simply, the terms of the agreement were such that the council could have terminated that licence at pretty much the drop of a hat. It wasn't something that was in interest. He therefore decided he preferred to have the informal agreement that was already in place.
Okay, and a similar question then. In March, I'm just trying to find the offer. Yes, I think it's on page 59 of the agenda. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong offer. It's here it is. Page 75. Again, an offer made in light of the lockdown and the fact that the youth centre was closed. So when no children are on site, obviously a lot of the council's objections fall away. And again, not even a response to this email. Why was that?
I'm not sure that's correct, that there was no response, but essentially the same reasons are outlined. I draw attention to paragraph 2 of the offer, which was, it can be terminated on 24 hours notice. Such notice to be given to the occupier or the kebab van or by email to your firm. What we did is we actually responded with a properly drawn up licence, which was offered to the council, but that was likewise declined.
Okay, and now in the middle of, so the situation was between December and March. Do you accept, Mr. Masalalu, Mr. Payne, that you were trading without a valid street trading consent and without landowners' permission? So you were breaking the law in 2 respects. Do you accept that?
It's not accepted that there was no consent from the landowner, and there was reliance being placed upon the policy of the council that traders are permitted to continue trading after they submitted an application up until the time of the committee's determination of that application.
Well, our position is quite clear. There was no landowner's consent. We can argue about that later, I suppose. My question is this, that in the middle of March, around the 12th of March, I think it was, a height barrier was installed at the entrance to the car park to stop the van from continuing to trade from the car park. And the van, I don't know if Mr. Masalalu was involved, but the barrier was tampered with by people working for him, or perhaps himself, I don't know. And then the van entered the site and traded that evening. Can you just explain why that was done?
I'm sorry, if there's an allegation that one of the employees of the van tampered with the lock, then it would be appreciated to see some evidence of that before making statements that that is an absolute fact. It is not the case. The lock indeed was damaged. When the van got there, I'm instructed that the lock was already damaged, the gate was already open, and therefore the van just drove in as it normally had done.
Well, councillors, for your note, it's page 136 is the notes that I'm working from on that. But the barrier was a clear indication that there was no permission at that time to trade from the site, and yet Mr. Masalalu went on and did it. I just don't understand why he wouldn't accept that the council had withdrawn its consent at this time.
Well, the plain fact of the matter is that he didn't acknowledge that the council had withdrawn its consent. There is an email which I do not think is in the pack, which referred to where Mr. Masalalu could obtain a key to that barrier in the event that wasn't necessary because the site was already open.
And as I understand it, since about March or around that time, Mr. Masalalu has traded from either a grass verge or a hard shoulder or something outside of the car park altogether. Now, again, that's I appreciate that licensing have chosen not to enforce, and I can understand why. But again, that's without permission, either in a landowner's sense or in a licensing sense. So is it accepted that that was in breach of the law as well?
Well, there is no getting away from the fact that because access had been denied to the car park, that's where Mr. Masalalu had been trading, yes.
And in all this time, so Mr. Masalalu's been aware since the end of November that he wasn't going to be allowed to trade from this location anymore. I can't see any indication in the papers as to what efforts he's made to try and find somewhere else to trade. We've seen that the council has made an attempt, but unfortunately within its portfolio there is no appropriate site. But I can't see any indication that Mr. Masalalu has recognised that he doesn't have permission to trade from this site and he does need to find somewhere else to go.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear what the question is.
Well, has Mr. Masalalu attempted to try and find somewhere else to trade from?
Well, the simple answer to that is yes, he has. But the sites that he's identified are not suitable. And we know that the site that he occupied before, which would be a preferable place for him to go, is not supported by the police.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've seen from Adam Davis's submission that appears at starts at page 63. Now, one of the complaints he makes is about litter, and we can see some pictures on page 66. Now, it seems to me that while the van might itself have a bin, it does appear that customers or perhaps members of staff are using the council's bins to dispose of waste from customers' purchases, and they're not being cleared up at the end of trading because they appear to have been left overflowing by the following day. Is that accepted?
Well, if we look at those photographs, the first one, there's a batch of 6 photographs showing, 5 of them showing a green bin. The first one on the top left-hand side shows some food containers within the bin. It shows a bottle, presumably of alcohol, on the ground, and what looks to be a sandwich wrapper on the ground. Both of those things on the ground clearly are nothing to do with this kebab van. It may well be that those items that are within the bin on this one occasion are indeed from the kebab van, but the situation is the kebab van does have I keep calling it a kebab van, the fast food van does have its own bins and are provided. I'm conscious that none of the photographs show any litter that could possibly be associated over the last 3 years of trading with the van, other than possibly the fork that appears in the bottom left-hand photograph.
Well, the impression that the staff at the youth centre have, and the impression I take from these photos, is fine that the fast food waste might well be in the bin, but those bins are overflowing, and the impression that we get is that Mr. Masalalu doesn't take responsibility for that litter. And fine, it might be the case that a sandwich wrapper is not a piece of waste coming from the food van, but it might be on the floor because you can see that the bin is absolutely stuffed. So does Mr. Masalalu accept that he has responsibility for that waste, and it's not acceptable just to leave it in a council bin for the council then to clear up?
I think that describing the bins as overflowing is rather extrapolating what one might call the truth. Clearly there is rubbish in the bin, clearly it is contained within the bin, clearly the applicant does what he can to remove rubbish that is from his undertaking from the site. It is possible that on this occasion he may have missed it. There is quite clearly rubbish in the bin, but there is not litter scattered around the site. If he was aware of the rubbish in the bin, I have no doubt, and perhaps he might like to confirm it, he would have removed it from that bin and taken it away.
Thank you. One final question. I couldn't quite work out from Mr. Masalalu's answers to your questions, Mr. Payne, whether he accepts that people, maybe not all, not or even a majority of customers, but drunk customers do from time to time come and visit the car park in order to buy food from the van. Is that accepted or not?
I think it's accepted that there are drunk people that come into the car park, whether they are coming to buy food from his van or whether they are trying to get into the youth centre is a matter for debate, and there is no evidence either way.
But would you agree it's probably more likely that they've come into the car park because the van's there and they want to buy food from the van?
No, I think that's an assumption that one simply cannot make. I don't want to go into the realms of giving evidence myself, but having dealt with youth centres in the past, quite clearly running a youth centre is prone to having people come to it potentially who are under the influence. It's not just a question that there is food being sold. I suspect that even if this kebab van, this fast food van was not there, the youth centre may have problems with drunk people turning up at their gates. It is interesting to see that there is no evidence provided or suggestions of that, but I would be absolutely astounded if there weren't issues of drunk people arriving anyway.
Sorry, I did say that was my final question. I've got one more to add. I think Mr. Masalalu accepted that people do, his customers do urinate in the car park, and that his response was to tell them not to do that. It just struck me maybe a little bit too late once that's happened. Telling someone not to do it's kind of it's acting after the horse has bolted, isn't it?
I rather suspect it would be rather difficult to intervene before it happened.
OK, thank you very much. I've got no more questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've had a request for a comfort break. If Sarah is quite happy to ask her questions before I finish this section, then we can have a comfort break for a short period. OK, Sarah?
Thank you. Cheers. Actually, some of those questions that have just been asked have raised a couple with me as well. So I now understand that the reason why there was no response to the month's landowner agreement was because the terms were not acceptable in light of there being 24 hours notice of termination of that. I can't see from the email trails of the informal agreement that was in place that there is a termination period in there. So how is the informal agreement preferable?
I think the point is that the informal agreement didn't have a termination period. So with that in case, one would normally expect, I would suggest in these circumstances, a 6-month notice period to be given.
A 6-month notice period, okay. Even though it's quite an informal agreement. Can I just check, in your submission, which goes over pages 87 and 88, you state, in the circumstances where a business has been trading for several years, it would be expected that proper notice with a 28-day period would have been served. Are you making that in reference to the street trader consent or the landowner permission?
I'm sorry, I have to keep scrolling across with my mouse, which takes me a little while. It's purely in relation to the landowner's consent, the landowner's permission. That's the period that we would normally expect, at absolute minimum, to be given for this type of situation. I'm sure that there are complicated legal arguments that we could have about whether there is a protected right under the Landlord and Tenant Act. Those are not issues to be discussed or appropriate, I think, for this hearing. They're relevant to possession proceedings. But no, indeed, in terms of the street trading consent, that's quite clear. That's been put in place, and the extent and the time period of that is quite clear. What is not clear is the landowner's permission. Under the informal agreement, there was no termination date.
Okay, thank you. Is there any rent paid for the use of this land?
No, there is no rent paid as far as I'm aware. What there is, though, in terms of a consideration for the use is actually having effectively a security presence on site with a kebab van. I keep saying kebab van, with a fast food van which provides lighting which is otherwise not present, you've heard, within the car park. And I understand also very shortly it will also provide CCTV to that particular area as well, which likewise is not present. So there is a benefit to the council by having that van present in the car park.
Okay, so if the van wasn't, oh, I can hear some replay. What's going on?
I will turn mine off.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that's better. I could hear my voice echoing. So you're saying, so in theory, if the van wasn't there, there wouldn't be that extra lighting there. Going back to the previous question of what they were asking, and I understand that there have been incidents where people have tried to enter the community centre, which has obviously posed a safeguarding situation. Now, obviously, we can't 100% say whether these were customers or not, but surely by the fact that there's lighting there and the van is there, surely that is increasing the chances of that kind of thing happening, is increasing the chances of there being a safeguarding concern. Would you not agree?
No, I'm afraid I wouldn't. By having lighting there and by providing a lighting presence and providing CCTV, that is an active deterrent for people entering the car park. What we have to remember, this is at the entrance to the car park and the centre is set further back. It does indeed have its own CCTV, and I'm surprised that there's been no evidence provided from those cameras. But my contention would be that providing lighting is something that acts as a deterrent. If that's not the case, then many of the planning decisions that have been made on the Safer by Design, which includes provision of lighting, are perhaps flawed.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly, you mentioned in your responses earlier that in looking for an alternative site, the previous site was not accepted by the police. So are you referring to the Reading Road or the St Paul's area?
I'm sorry, the Reading Road area. Yes, that was the reason for the move in the first place. If it were possible to move back there, then of course, Ms Ogler would be more than happy to do so.
And have conversations happened to try and look at St Paul's again?
Yes, I understand they have. I understand that they are not willing to allow the van to trade for whatever reason they wish to have. That's their right.
Okay, but I mean, just playing devil's advocate here, currently obviously no landowner consent. In your words, that shouldn't stop us giving a license, giving consent though.
Well, indeed, if they made an application, there would be no different situation for that car park, that alternative car park. Then absolutely yes, that there would be no difference to this matter. But because there has been a clear indication of from that car park that the landowner doesn't want them there, it is by mutual consent. And bearing in mind they were only there for a relatively short period of time. And there was no establishment of any rights there. They have acceded to that request.
When you say establishment of rights, what do you mean by that?
So if there is no formal lease, the law in my submission is that if a trader has traded there for a period, and my brain fails me at this moment, I think it's either 6 months or 12 months, then there is a right to continue trading.
Okay. Just on, where was this? So I've made a few notes here. Just bear with me one second. Oh, here it is. It's on your submission and it goes over pages 88 and 89. And it says the actual nature of the agreement is not a matter of for concern in considering the grant of a street trading consent. As set out above, the concerns should be whether there is A, obstruction of the street or danger to persons using it, or B, nuisance or annoyance whether to persons using the street or otherwise. And then you state clearly there is no grant under A as the van is located off the highway in a car park. I just want to clarify this because you state the word highway there, but under A, it actually uses the word street, and street doesn't mean highway in this sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. You're absolutely right, because the provisions do allow for land in private ownership to be classed as part of the street to which these provisions apply. Had it not been the case, then of course we would not be in the situation of needing to apply for a street trading consent. Okay, but the fact remains, there is no obstruction that's occurring in our submission.
So in this regard, obstruction of the street or danger to persons using it, it does include the car park under the definition of street. But obviously it's a matter of opinion, it seems, as to whether that is happening, because obviously some of the evidence does say that there is an obstruction. Obviously we've heard counter arguments to that, but not necessarily evidence. But it's an opinion, I guess, that you're stating that there is no obstruction, and obviously the view of the landowner is there is an obstruction of the street. Is that
well? Indeed, yeah. You have hit the nail succinctly on the head. There is an opinion expressed here as to whether there is an obstruction or there has been an obstruction. There is, I think, little, if any, evidence that can actually show that there has been an obstruction that is due to the employees or the owner of this van.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to the application for the renewal of the licence, given that it takes, as we've heard already, 21 days for a consultation, and it's sent out a good month in advance, why was a little over 2 weeks given that the council or the licensing authority wouldn't have actually been able to give a decision before the street trading consent has expired?
Well, I think actually, in reality, it would have been able to. The council has set its own consultation period of 21 days, as I understand. If the application had been sent out a month in advance, that would have given him probably a period of no more than 7 days to complete it and return. I can't comment as to why it was submitted when it was, but clearly there was reliance placed on the council's policy that a licence will continue in force until such times as this committee has considered it if there was an appeal. With that in mind, whether it was submitted a week in advance or 3 weeks in advance, as the case may be, we would suggest is actually possibly not relevant to the considerations that you should have today.
I think it is relevant, and it's certainly a line of inquiry that is of interest. I mean, I don't know if, Karen, if you can confirm the 21 days consultation period, is that statutory?
No, it's not. No, it's a local policy.
Okay, what is statutory?
There is no statutory requirement.
Okay, and why have we based that as 21 days? Is it in line with planning, perhaps? Or?
It's the same as planning do, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think for now I've got no further questions.
Thank you very much. Right, I think at this stage we'll take a comfort break. If the time now is 12:12, if we say 10 minutes, so back here at 12:22. If you're all happy with that,
thank you.
I would suggest you turn your cameras off for a moment, and we'll resume 12:22.
Chair, Irene's on mute, I think.
Oh, are you on mute? That's it. Hello, Irene.
Hello.
Right, would you like to put your case?
Well, you'll be hearing from me if that's okay, Chair. And
right.
I've got Irene here who works for the Estates Unit, and I've also got Adam Davis, who's the Assistant Director in Children and Social Care, and I've also finally got Carolyn Heap, who is the Youth Centre Manager. And the way we propose to present our cases, I'll do most of the talking, and then I've got Irene, Adam and Carolyn available to answer any questions that you or Mr. Payne might have. If you're happy with that, then I'll make a start on presenting the case for the Estates Unit.
Thank you very much.
So, as Mr. Payne's identified, the council's got two hats on in this hearing. Firstly, there's you councillors, you're the licensing subcommittee, you're making a licensing decision. I'm speaking on behalf of the council in its capacity as landowner. And you'll have seen in the summary of your report, this is page 7 of the agenda, that the reason why this appeal hearing is taking place at all is that landowner consent was withdrawn, and as licensing officers saw it, they had no option but to refuse. And I'll emphasise this at the beginning, that summary is entirely correct legally, and we'll come back to why I'm saying that's the case in a moment. Now, I'll just let Councillor Hobbs sort her door out. At the beginning of the hearing, Mr. Dufour gave you some advice on what test you apply when making your decision. And I think this is important to clarify at the beginning, because I think Mr. Payne and I disagree on this. The test in law is that you may grant a consent if you think fit, simple as that. You can take into account anything that's relevant. So you're not limited to whether an obstruction of the highway would be caused. You're not limited to whether there would be a nuisance, although those things are clearly important. You can go further than that. And I would say that there are 3 issues that I think are particularly important, and I would ask you to take into account. Firstly, and I think I'm not sure whether the message has finally got through. Mr. Masalalu does not have landowners' consent or landowners' permission to trade from this location anymore, and the negotiations have come to an end. That's an important fact, because if you were to grant a consent today, Mr. Masalalu could not use it. It's exactly as Councillor Kerr pointed out. If he was to go onto site, he would be breaching his consent because he doesn't have landowner's consent, so he'd be committing a criminal offence, and he would also be committing a trespass in civil law. So I say your officers were entirely right to conclude that the only thing they could do here was to refuse this application. My second issue is that the van has caused real problems for the youth centre in terms of antisocial behaviour, and I'll pose this question at the beginning. Would we be even having this discussion if the setting that we were thinking about was a school car park? Now, I'll be saying that there's no real difference, no practical difference between a school and a youth centre, and that I would ask you to think in those terms when thinking about the issues that we are presenting. And finally, there's a third issue which relates to safeguarding, but I'm not going to say anything more about that because we need to go into part 2 in order to discuss that in any more detail. So that's my introduction, as it were. Those are my 3 issues, and I'll work through them as I go, if I may. So just to explain a little bit about the background to this application, the car park belongs to the youth centre. It's used by children and families throughout the day and actually into the evening. So I said it's a bit like a school. In fact, it's probably a more intensive use than the school, because school use doesn't tend to go on much longer beyond school hours. And you can see from Mr. Davis's submission that actually there are events involving children going on into the evening as well. And you will also have seen in his submission that the car park is sometimes additionally used by local school children as an informal pick-up and drop-off location. So there's a lot of children on site, and that's an important thing to think about when thinking about the complaints that we're raising. Now, the van has traded for about 4 years from this location. And again, I totally agree with Councillor Kerr. The arrangement seems to have been quite informal and sorted out by an exchange of emails rather than what would have been preferable. I think Mr. Payne and I agree on this. a proper written contract saying here's how long you can occupy, or here's how much notice we'll give you. None of that exists even today, although you would already have got the sense from my questions that the council has recently made an attempt to formalise that relationship, but it's totally informal. Now, I'm told by the youth centre manager, Carolyn, and Adam, that their understanding is that children's services were not properly consulted. They may have been looped in on some discussions, but they've always had a problem with the van being here, and it's only now that those concerns have actually been registered through the licensing process and taken on board by the estates unit. Now, maybe that you could criticise communication channels within the council. I can't explain why this hasn't been picked up as an issue. But Mr. Payne has asked, well, what's changed? Well, from the council's perspective, nothing has changed. There's always been a problem from the people who are actually there on the ground, the people that we trust to run these services on behalf of children in the district. Now, I don't know how long Carolyn's been in her post. Adam's only been in his post for a little over a year. So this is effectively the first time he's been involved with the license renewal, because as you know, the consent is renewed every year. And as Councillor Kerr pointed out, just because something was agreed in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in place forever. And the council is entitled to consider and reconsider, change its mind, and that may or may not have happened. The point is there are problems, and that is why the council, in its capacity as landowner, has withdrawn its permission for Mr. Masalalu to use this location. So my first issue, remember, is landowner's consent. It's a condition of the licence. The reference for your note is page 19 of the agenda. That's the list of standard conditions. And it says quite clearly that on land other than the highway, the permission of the landowner and any necessary planning permission, and note in passing there's no planning permission here either, shall have to be obtained. Written confirmation of such shall be provided to the council prior to the commencement of trading. So as I said a moment ago, without the landowner's permission to trade from that location, the trader is automatically in breach of their consent, and trading in breach of your consent or trading in breach of a condition of your consent is a criminal offence, and the council could, and it sounds like they may well have to prosecute. That obviously comes at tremendous expense, having to take a court case to the magistrates' court. It would also be a trespass, so a breach of the civil law as well, because the trader would obviously be on the landowner's land without their permission. Now, Mr. Payne's suggestion that, well, yes, then the council could take legal action, that's a bit mad, isn't it? That he's saying not only that, he's saying that the council would have to spend thousands more of public money enforcing its rights as landowner. That doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. The situation that Mr. Payne is suggesting you do is to set up a situation where Mr. Masalalu, if he was to act on that consent, would be breaking the law. That seems to me totally nonsensical. And I don't see how you could possibly think it was fit to grant a license and a consent in these circumstances. So that's why I emphasise this at the outset. I think that I would suggest, with respect, is a complete answer to this case, and it's the same conclusion that your licensing officers came to. There's no reason to grant a consent here where Mr. Masalalu doesn't have, and he unfortunately, negotiations having broken down, he's not going to get permission from the estates unit to trade from this location. Now, my second issue, it relates to the real problems that this van has caused to the staff and children and families who are using the youth centre. And I'll acknowledge right from the beginning here that it's inevitable that a late night fast food van is going to have to deal with tricky customers and challenging behaviour. And I can't imagine that's an easy job. And you'll have seen cases like this in your licensing experience, councillors. The question, though, is whether the council should be essentially allowing this to take place in an environment which is supposed to be dedicated to children. And again, I make the point here about whether we would be even having this discussion in a school in relation to a school car park. I think the answer is quite clearly we wouldn't. And I don't see why there's any difference here between a youth centre and a school. And Mr. Payne, I think, seemed to criticise the council for coming to the view that it didn't want a fast food van in the car park of a youth centre. I don't see that's a ground for criticism whatsoever. I think that's a perfectly sensible and reasonable approach to take. Quite clearly, leaving aside the issues of litter, drunken misbehaviour, urination, there is a serious question to be asked whether it's compatible with use of the land as a whole as a youth centre with fast food. And I think that's a fair question to ask. Now, you've seen the email from Irene, that's at page 41 of your agenda, and that summarises helpfully in bullet point form why the decision was made to withdraw landowners' permission. And it's important to emphasise here that the estates unit is effectively neutral in this. They're acting on the instructions of Children's Services, and Children's Services, obviously, they're the people that operate this site. They're the people that we trust with safeguarding. And so I think it's entirely appropriate that they should take, the estates unit should take their lead from what their colleagues in Children's Services are saying. And we've got the statement from Mr. Davis on behalf of Children's Services. His statement starts at page 63 of your agenda, and his list of his concerns are explained from page 65. And the things that he highlights are these: that the presence of the van encourages a large number of people to come onto the site who've got no relation to what's going on in the youth centre. It encourages extra cars, some travelling at dangerous speeds, and that's come directly from the people that work there day to day. And it encourages adults to linger in the car park, and you can see proof of that because the green council bins are left overflowing the following morning. That poses, I would suggest, an inherent safeguarding risk, and it's not consistent with the purpose of the youth centre, which is to serve children and families. Now, littering is a big problem here. We've already looked at the photos that appear on page 66, and we're not saying that that was just one occasion. We're saying this is a consistent problem that the staff and the users of the youth centre have experienced. And it suggests that Mr. Masalalu is not taking responsibility, as his consent requires, for the litter that his business creates, and that's unacceptable. You've heard also from about problems in the car park. I think everybody agrees this is a fairly small car park for the number of people that are trying to use it. And the van occupies the same spot in the car park each time. And it means that anyone who's perfectly appropriately parked in that place during the day, but hasn't moved their car by 4:30 when the van turns up on site, is blocked in. And I think Mr. Masalalu did accept that he would have to move his van in order for people then to move their cars and leave the site. Now that's begs the question whether these two uses are really compatible, and it obviously causes problems for people who are there to use the youth centre, and sometimes they have to park on the curb, or you might have seen towards the back of the agenda, the reference is page 156 and 157. That the bin lorry's been unable to access the site as well because customers' cars have blocked access to the site. Now, I might take a pause here in my discussions and ask if Carolyn Heap could unmute herself and, if possible, turn on her video as well, because I just had a quick question to ask her about this.
Yes, I'm here. I hope you don't mind me not turning the video on.
If members are happy with that, thank you. So, Carolyn, I understand that you've had experience of your car being blocked in by the van. Can you just explain to the councillors what that was like for you?
Yes, I have. When I took over managing the centre in November 2017, I was told, make sure you don't put your car in the bit where the kebab man is, because he will come looking for you. So around 4:30 every evening, while people are still working, there's a general sense of panic and people moving to get their car. Mario has always been pleasant to me as I've gone to get my car at times, apart from on or around the 17th of December, my car was left in that place. It was, I think, the second parking space as you turn left, and I went out, it was dark and cold, and I saw one of the workers of the kebab van on his phone, and I said, can I get my car out? Now, although I was the only car there and there was a lot of space around me, my car was blocked in by the van that was about a foot away from the back of my car. Then the man I'd spoken to went somewhere and brought two men back, one being Mario. And while I'm in my car in the dark, they looked in the window. I opened my window and said, can I please get my car out? And Mario said, this is my time, 4:30. So I said, yes, I know, but I'd like to get my car out. And he said, it's my time, give me money. And I said, look, I don't have money. I just need to move my car. They moved the van, and in my panic to get to the other side of the car park, I drove over a big concrete barrier that scratched the bottom of my car, and managed to move my car around and get back into the centre. So people are blocked in, and Mario has been in before, and he asks admin to go into groups where there are adults and young people and ask people to move their car, and very often will follow or try to follow the admin worker into the group.
Okay, Carolyn, thank you very much. Can I just ask you to mute your microphone?
Yes.
Thank you. So, councillors, that's the experience of no less than the manager of the youth centre. You've seen poor and potentially dangerous health and safety practice. That's been highlighted on page 68 of the agenda. Now, that was the situation really as it stood in November 2019, but you can see that there is some material in the agenda, pages 69 to 72, about concerns that were expressed previously in 2017. And I would highlight this in particular, the very worrying situation of drunk customers coming into the centre itself. Now, Mr. Payne suggested that I think we're agreed that drunk people do from time to time come into the car park. Mr. Payne suggested, well, it's not clear whether it's because of the van or because they've got some business at the youth centre. I think common sense would suggest it's quite obviously because of the presence of a late night takeaway. I think it's well, it seems a bit bizarre to suggest otherwise. As I said, it's inevitable that these kinds of customers will come and buy product from the van. That's in the nature of the business. Question is, should it be taking place here, given the potential for conflict, the potential for risk, the potential for violence? I think Mr. Masalalu accepts also that no public toilets are available. And we know from our experience licensing in town centres that public urination is a real problem, and people rightly get very upset about it. And the fact that it's happening in the youth centre is perhaps even greater of a problem, given the kind of people that should be prioritised for using it. There is no solution to that problem as far as members of the public are concerned. I didn't quite catch what the arrangement for members of staff and going to the toilet is, but there is nothing, as far as I'm aware, for members of the public. And so inevitably that's always going to be a problem. And you can't tell someone to stop once they've started, I think, as I made the point earlier. Now, the situation since early December is that landowners' permission to use the car park was withdrawn. And although offers have been made to reinstate a limited form of permission, none of those offers have been accepted, and there is no further offer on the table. Now, the first offer was made, the reference, councillors, is page 59 of your agenda, on the 4th of December, and that was in response to the understandable intervention and concerns of ward members that they didn't want a local businessman to be prevented from earning his livelihood. And I can understand why they made that objection, and I can understand why officers offered more time, effectively 1 month, for Mr. Masalalu to find an alternative location. Now, that, as far as I can see, that offer met with no response whatsoever. And so on page 41, you can see Irene's email, 13th of January, that temporary permission offer was withdrawn. And then the following day, the street trading consent application was refused by licensing. Then, as I said, and I don't think this is well, as I said, since then, Mr. Masalalu has continued to trade. He hasn't had a valid consent, and he hasn't had landowner's permission. So he has been breaking the law. As I said, I can understand why licensing officers chose not to, strictly speaking, enforce the law, but that is essentially the underlying situation. And I would emphasise this. I asked Mr. Masalalu a question about the height barrier. On the 12th of March, the council installed a height barrier to prevent the van from entering the site, to enforce the situation in law, which was that Mr. Masalalu did not have permission to trade from that location. And you can see on page 136 the reference to staff of the van tampering with the barrier and damaging it in order to access the site and carrying on trading from that location. And the damage to the barrier had to be repaired. Now, I'd ask you to reflect whether that shows an appropriate degree of respect for the licensing process and the wishes of the council in its capacity as landowner. Now, events even obviously moved on from mid-March. We got lockdown, the youth centre closes, and officers, I think quite fairly, think, well, if the children are not using the site day to day, then most of our objections fall away, and we can allow Mr. Masalalu a short period of time in which to continue trading, to make some form of income, assuming that he's also making efforts to find somewhere else to trade from. And you can see an offer was made, page 75 of your agenda, and that was rejected. I can maybe understand why 24 hours notice to terminate the agreement may not have seemed very attractive, but as Councillor Kerr pointed out, surely more attractive than the informal, very vague and ambiguous agreement that existed before then. So that offer was ignored, and in fact, since March, as I understand it, the van has traded from outside of the car park, a place that would never have been permitted by the consent, and the van was moved on from that location precisely because it was causing problems 4 years ago. And again, I'd ask you, councillors, to reflect whether that shows an appropriate degree of respect to the proper process. Now, taking a step back from the detail, having allowed the van to trade from this location, as Councillor Kerr pointed out, free of charge, unlike other traders who trade from council-owned land, for almost 4 years, there was never any promise that this arrangement would continue indefinitely. It was always going to be conditional on the needs of the youth centre primarily, and as a secondary consideration, how the members of staff working at the van and how the customers conduct themselves from this location. It seems to me totally unsurprising that a time would come when the youth centre staff, backed up by children's services, backed up by the estates unit, would say enough is enough. We don't want this behaviour to carry on. This is incompatible with the use that this land should be put to, which is use as a youth centre. And so I can't see any real reason to criticise the estates unit for saying permission has been withdrawn and you need to find somewhere else to trade. And this is, as I said, this has been going on for over 6 months. So I would have expected efforts to have been made to find an alternative location. And as I said in questioning, I can understand that might be difficult, but I can't see what real efforts have been made. So, councillors, that's all I've got to say on my first 2 issues. As I said, I do have more to say on the 3rd issue, safeguarding, but I'll pause for now. We've got Adam and Carolyn and Irene available for any questions you might have or any questions Mr. Payne might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think at this stage, before we ask questions of those, we should go into part 2 and hear from the police. So if we can go there, and then after that, we can then have the questions to Property and Children's Services and the police. Sorry.
Chairman, can I just ask legal advice on this? Ben, is it appropriate to go into part 2 now, or shall we do some of the questioning in the public part of the meeting? Ben?
Yeah, I'm just turning my camera and microphone on. I hope you can now hear me. I would suggest that we deal with Mr. Lewin's issues 1 and 2 in public, so that those issues are explored in public. And then when we hear from the police in part 2, I suspect that's where Mr. Lewin's issue 3 will come up, and any questions related to his issue 3 can be dealt with. That will mean that so much of the hearing as possible is able to proceed in public, and only where we're likely to deal with exempt information, which is the reason for going into part 2, will that be being dealt with. I think that would I think that would sit with the order of procedure, which is on page 5 of your agenda.
I'm looking at page 5 and I notice that it's got exclusion of the public, and then we go into 6, where it does give the opportunity for the panel licence authority to ask the objectors witnesses question. So that was what I was thinking, to do it as item 6 with the police as well. With the first 2 rather.
So I want to ask my questions in public.
Yeah, they would be in public after the exclusion part 2.
I think the practical aspect, though, of excluding the public means we should do that, and that's the end of that. So if we
right, okay. Well, if that's the way you wish to go, I'm quite happy to go that way. So, okay, we'll ask the panel. Shall we? We'll start with you, Sarah, if you would like to ask questions of Property and Children's Services or through Matt.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, back in 2016, when the landowner permission informally was granted, the CEO at the time, I understand, was Andy Couldrick. Am I right in thinking that?
I have no idea, but
is anyone on the line able to confirm that? That's my understanding.
Correct.
Okay. So the reason why I raised this is while he was CEO at the time, prior to that, Andy actually was head of children's services, and he had a background as a social worker. So I guess what I'm a little bit surprised about is someone with that kind of background on the leadership team allowed this to happen. So that leaves me with 2 possible scenarios. Either something has changed, or there's a massive difference in professional opinion here. Could you shed any light on that, please?
May I say something, Mr. Chairman, about this? Andrew Couldrick was the CEO, Sarah. So he has to take advice from all the areas of officers within the council and the legal saying. He has to almost stay impartial until he hears of everything that is going on. So I don't think you could actually, in my opinion, go ahead with that question to Matt, because obviously it's, a CEO is the head of the whole council.
Could I take some legal advice on this, please? Because I believe it's a relevant question, given that even though he was CEO at the time, he obviously has a social worker background, and I believe it's a relevant question. I don't know if Ben could give some advice, please.
Well, what you're looking to do is to decide whether it's fit to grant a licence today, based on what you know now. You're hearing from professional witnesses today, and you'll give due weight to the views of those witnesses that you think is fit. If you think it's appropriate to give weight to views of somebody in the past, then there may be circumstances in which that would be appropriate, but you might want to think about what evidence you have as to their views, what involvement the person had at the time, and those sorts of issues before dealing with that.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess the reason why I'm asking is part of the applicant submission is about what has actually changed. And we're being told that back when this was originally agreed, I mean, it was a youth centre back in 2016. So surely the issues that are being raised now were issues back then, but if they were, then permission wouldn't have been granted. So I guess I'm just trying to ascertain really how we've got someone who actually has that background and it was still granted back then. Is it just a matter of professional opinion? Because I think a lot of what we're going to have to decide on as a panel is a lot of weighing up opinion here.
Well, it's a little difficult to answer the question because none of the people that I take instructions from and none of the people involved on the ground today were part of that decision-making process. They weren't in post at the time. I don't know anything about the former CEO's background. The impression that my officers have is that this was decided at a high level without actually consulting the people who work in the youth centre. So from the youth centre's perspective, this has always, as I said, this has always been a problem. I don't know what was going on at the upper levels of the council that resulted in this decision being made. But obviously, as I said, the promise, the agreement that the van could trade from this location was going to be conditional on a number of things. One of them would obviously be the behaviour of the van members of staff and the customers. But inevitably, as people come into post, I think Councillor Kerr, you made this point this morning, different officers will take different views, and the view that's taken by the people that we in the council have given responsibility for children's services and safeguarding are saying that the van is in inappropriate use in this location. I don't know if that does answer your question or not. I think there's an element of a change of view because new people have come into post. But the people, as Mr. Dufaux said, we're looking at the situation today, and the situation today is those officers who are in charge of these matters object.
Okay, no, thank you. Could I ask, on page 69 of the agenda, it's an email from Chris McCann, who I understand was the then centre manager, and it was raised about a risk assessment. Did a risk assessment ever materialise?
I've not seen it, and I assume if it existed, I would have seen it. So if anyone wants to correct me on that from the officer's side, please step in. But I don't think, as far as I'm aware, one was carried out.
Adam or Carolyn, can either of you confirm if there's a risk assessment as per that email, please?
Sorry, if that was a question for me, I missed it because I've got data issues. Could you just repeat it, please, Councillor Kerr?
Yes, on page 69 in Chris McCann's email, there's reference made that is there a risk assessment done for this matter? Has a risk assessment ever been done?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Adam?
I can't. You keep going digital on me.
Okay. Can anyone else? Okay.
Carolyn, do you?
No. I'm not aware that one was done. I have not seen one.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Right. With regards to the complaints made by yourself, Carolyn, and the centre staff, have these complaints been made formally? Because obviously the only complaints that we've seen from a licensing perspective is that one incident in November 2017. But what have you done about the issues that you've raised?
There are staff have told me that they stopped raising any issues because they felt that things weren't being dealt with. They were of the opinion that the council, someone up high in the council, had made this decision. So what they did was they dealt with things as they turned up. So the person who runs the youth group there told me that when people have come in with kebabs and sat in the foyer drunk and falling asleep, that's happened a couple of times. They've managed to get them out of the centre without any trouble. People have also come in to use the toilet. A couple of times it's been people who are drunk. Sometimes it's people who are sober. And so it's unfortunate that they've dealt with things without doing it formally. Prior to that, when the previous manager was there up until May last year, he asked for emails to be sent to him so that he could deal with things. So I know conversations were had with Mario in relation to the rubbish that was around the centre.
Can I just confirm the name Mario? Is this an informal name for Mr. Masalalu?
No, this is the man who runs the kebab van for Mr. Masalalu.
Right, okay, thank you. We didn't have that name in any of the agenda pack from what I could see. Okay, with regards to the opening hours, so what time does the community centre typically close, please?
There are groups running in the evening, some with children, so it could be open on Mondays, I think, and Wednesdays or Thursdays. There's Duke of Edinburgh generally, and they run the Explorers Extreme group of an evening, which is adults with physical and learning disabilities and young people. So they are there till around 10 o'clock at night.
Okay. And references made on page 63 of the agenda. The centre car park has also become the informal drop-off and collection area for the local school, with parents driving in and dropping off or collecting their child. What kind of time are we talking about? So I'm assuming this extends past normal school pickup time. There wouldn't actually be any crossover with the van.
I don't think there would be in terms of the van, only in terms of where people have parked their car and need to move their car before the van got there. It's very difficult because you've got parents sitting with their cars in that area, but also an awful lot of young people running across the car park, getting into cars. So there's a period of time where it's very full, quite dangerous, and although there's not a crossover, there is if people are late or if we want to get out to move our car for the van to get in.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions more now for Irene. So I'm just having a quick look here. With regards to other locations, I understand that, I mean, what kind of research, what has been looked at? And I mean, surely there must be some locations. I don't even know what the term suitable means.
Well, suitable, it needs to be able to encompass the hours. So 4:30 to 3 a.m. By our criteria, you would need to have some passing trade, etc. I had some discussions with colleagues in the States as to what we thought might be appropriate. I'm very familiar with the portfolio, having been in post since April 2004. We couldn't think of anything, but also in an email I sent to the trader, I did say, if you think the council can help you finding a location, let me know, or we will. But he didn't respond to that. So having not had a response and having an awful lot of other things to do, not a massive amount of work went into it.
Okay, I mean, is there any reason why, say, the marketplace or something like that can't be considered? I find it hard to believe that there isn't a single location.
I did discuss the marketplace with a colleague of mine who manages the town centre. He didn't feel that was appropriate.
Why?
I don't know. I can only guess it's the trading hours.
Okay, but you have
just, Councillor, if I can just follow up on Irene's answer to that. While these are certainly legitimate questions to ask, I think the focus of this application is whether the consent should be granted at this particular location.
No, I appreciate that, but I guess we can only look at that particular location. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is what effort has actually been made into looking at alternatives, and obviously time has been given for that. But I'm trying to ascertain how wisely that time has been used. I mean, but no, I take your point. On page 55 of the agenda, it also states that the applicant did not apply for planning consent. What planning consent is required for him to trade at this location?
Well, I'm not an expert in planning, but I have spoken to Claire Lawrence, who's head of development control, and she confirmed that planning consent is required. I think he has planning consent for an advertisement board or such like, but no consent to trade from this location. But you would need to follow that up with Claire Lawrence, I'm afraid.
I might be able to help a little bit there, Councillor. So the lawful use, I don't know if you sit on planning committee, the lawful use of the land will be for use as a youth centre, community centre, something like that. And that's quite a different use for hot food takeaway. So you would need planning permission for that.
So why was this not dealt with back in 2016?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
The decision-making process doesn't seem to have been as thorough as I think we all would have wished. That's all I can say. Obviously, none of the officers now involved were involved at the time, but that was definitely an issue that maybe should have been tidied up at the time.
Which I guess adds weight to the fact that this was a very informal arrangement. Okay, all right, thank you. I've got some things to think about. I might have some more questions later, but for now, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emma, do you have any questions to ask?
No, I'll have something much later.
Okay. Can I just ask Caroline a question? With all these issues that were taking place, and you said that you spoke to officers of the council, didn't really get too much response. Did you ever in these times feel it necessary to call the police?
I haven't, because I wasn't based at the site until the manager who was there left, and that was in May. So I'm not aware that the police have been called.
Thank you. Okay. No, that's fine. Right. So without any further questions at this, just muted myself. Without any further questions at this stage, I think we now can go to part two, which will then, I will ask the public.
I think just that Mr. Payne be given the opportunity to ask questions.
Sorry, who's this? Sorry?
Mr. Payne has to be given the opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've obviously got a different order of procedure to you. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Mr. Payne.
I could see Mr. Lewin was looking expectantly at and remiss that I wasn't giving him the opportunity to ask questions. I have but a small number, so I'm not going to disappoint him. Whether this is a question for him or whether he will need to take instructions. Is it accepted that the car park is used by people other than the customers of the van and the youth centre?
I'll ask one of the officers to answer that. I don't know the answer, I'm afraid.
Hi, it's Adam here. Hello. So the car park is predominantly used by the staff from the youth centre, and there is some parking for staff, children's services staff that do occupy the main town hall building.
Okay, let me ask the question again. Is it accepted that there are people other than the youth centre that are using that car park?
I think I would refer to my previous answer. So the staff from Children's Services, who some occupy the Children's Centre, the youth centre, and some staff who do occupy the town hall do park there. So the answer would be yes.
Yes. Right. The centre itself, is it correct that that's used for purposes other than use? It's hired out, isn't it?
It's a mixed use, ranging, I would say, from early years through to adults in terms of, I believe it's a line dancing group that meets there.
And is the facility hired out to people who want to hire it for private purposes?
I'd have to defer to Carolyn for the details of that, but those groups that do occupy, I believe, they do rent that space.
Nobody's hired it as far as I'm aware since I've been there, but I'm aware that people have in the past for a Saturday evening, but not since I've been there. Very well.
So for a private party or something of that nature, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. And then finally, the car park and the centre itself, is that covered by CCTV?
Part of it is. So we have an overview of the gate and probably the left of that.
Overview of the gate, right. And is there not CCTV on the entrance to the premises, to the centre?
Yeah, overview of the gate. Yeah,
it's just overview of the gate, all right.
Well, that is the entrance.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have any further questions? Yes, Sarah.
So I just have one, and what I'd like to know is, would any of the objectors consider, should we decide this, I'm not saying that this is what we're deciding, but should we decide this, would they consider granting a shorter term period of permission in order to provide time for Mr. Salih to look at alternatives? Because I understand a licence is up to 12 months, but that's a maximum. So would landowner permission be agreed for a shorter period?
Chairman, if I could just interject, just to clarify this point about 12 months, and this is both for and against me, I suppose. If a license were granted, then it would run from November last year when the previous one ran out until November this year. That would be the maximum period that you could grant, rather than the 12-month period from today.
Thank you. I guess what I'm just trying to establish is, should we agree to give Mr. Masalalu a little bit more time to find someone, allow him to trade in the meantime? Would Property and Children's Services be willing, certainly given that the youth centre isn't currently being used at the moment, to have a period of grace, I guess?
I think, Councillor, the answer is no. That offer was effectively made at the end of March, and that was always conditional on it coming to an end after today's hearing. And I imagine, we haven't discussed this, but I imagine the youth centre must be planning now for a reopening, and even in part, if not obviously not completely anytime soon. So I'm going to say the answer is no. And the officers, encourage them to correct me if I'm overstepping the mark here, but I think the view they've taken is the negotiations have been going not very well, but they have been going since November, and that hasn't reached any kind of agreement. Offers have been made and not accepted, and I think, as I said, at the end of the road has been reached on that.
Can I just interrupt at this moment and just ask Mr. Payne if he can come back to this at a later date? He said just now that any licence would run from November 2019, so it could only be granted up until November 2020. Obviously, I need to give you advice at some point on this issue. The way I read the legislation, a street trading consent may be granted for any period not exceeding 12 months, but may be revoked at any time. The way I read legislation is you'd be making your decision today and therefore granting the license today. So the way I read the legislation, the period would run from today, or indeed the date of your decision, rather than some earlier period. And I just want to understand from him if there's any authority in support of his view that it runs from that earlier date, because I need to give you advice on this, and so I just need to have his submission clear so that I can do that. No need for it to be addressed now, but if it could be dealt with at his closings or at some point later, that would be very helpful.
Well, I'm content to deal with it now if that helps. The reason that I say that it would take effect from last November is because that's the period that was applied for. So effectively be granting of what could be considered a retrospective effect. If your advice is that a license granted could be a year from today, you will find no opposition from me on that particular point.
Okay. Could I then ask either Adam or Carolyn, what are the plans for reopening the youth centre, please?
We're currently in the process of undertaking risk assessments across all our buildings that ceased operation in response to COVID, and we are in the process of just finalising that with a view of commencing operations in the near future, subject to the outcome of that. It has to go through quite as you can imagine, in terms of reoccupying and ensuring that it's COVID compliant in terms of social distancing and safety. So imminently.
So have you got any ideas of timeframes?
I couldn't give you a specific time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Ben Defoe, did you have your hand up? Did you wish to speak?
I probably just put it down.
Right. Right. Are there any further questions? I take that as a no. No, we're okay. Okay, now we can go on to part two. So I would ask, I think it's Lucienne who's taking control at the moment to exclude. Hello, Lucienne.
Can you confirm that we stop the live streaming now?
Sorry, Lucienne.
Are you doing that, Lucienne?
So, Bill, if you read out the bit about going into part two, and then my colleague will immediately stop the live stream. You need to read out the bit about exclusion.
Righty-ho, 1 second. Let me find the necessary piece of paper. Okay, exclusion of the public. Under section 100A, part 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 7, part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, as amended, as appropriate. So paragraph 7, information related to any action taken or to be taken in connection with the prevention, investigation or prosecution of the crime. Okay, thank you.